Ladies and gentlemen, today is October 26th, 2025, and we are here to talk about the world, current events, foreign policy, economics, you name it, we'll talk about it in another episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith. Smith.
Hello?
Yo.
Hey, how are you?
Doing well. Back from a convention and a subathon. We haven't met in a bit. But things are going really well, and we have a fun announcement for you in particular.
Oh, God.
Yep. So,
well, what's the announcement?
Yeah, we'll just get it out of the way. One of the objectives of this recent subathon that we did was to crowdfund a new PC upgrade for you, because you've been rocking with this setup for a while, and yeah, we have smashed through all 3 weeks of it, so we have basically funded you a computer. Fuzzy Cord has a rough build, which I will link to you. And this is like, think of it as a bonus. You've done a ton of work for me over a very long period of time. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, that'll mean that you're going to crash less when we do stuff. So selfishly, it benefits me as well. Here, I'll link you the build. And I'll just put it in chat as well if people want to peek at it.
Well, I'm a little speechless. I don't know what to say. That's very sweet of you guys.
Yeah. Okay. When you were telling me about the 15-minute load times of BG3, I was like, we could cut that in half or better. And this is like a... Oh, nice raid. Pig, welcome. Welcome. Thank you for the big raid. We're actually just announcing Agent Smith, the guy that we've been doing this Sunday World Discussion segment with for 9 years now. During the last subathon, we were able to crowdfund him a PC upgrade. So we just posted his build. What was Pig monologuing about? This is his PC build. Send you, thank you for the 40 months of support. Pig is unzipping his pants as we speak. Sometimes it must be done. It's a modest gaming PC. Yeah, so ballpark, I would guess that with the case and stuff, it could be like 1.2K for all of this. And feel free, like, if you wanted to adjust any elements of the PC build. You're not beholden, contracted to use these parts. It's just like an idea of us trying to save you some time and give you a suggestion. So congrats, and thank you so much for being awesome, doing your research, getting notes every week. It's a lot of effort on your part. And I do, like, you do get something for every appearance, but on top of that, just like, as a friend and fellow gamer, this is something that I feel like you would benefit enormously from. As an internet person.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That is very sweet, and I do appreciate it. I don't know if I deserve it, but I definitely appreciate the sentiment.
Too bad. We treat our people well here, or try to anyway. Let's give it up for Agent Smith.
Yeah, I'm sorry we didn't do it 2 weeks ago, I think it was. I wasn't feeling too well, so if not for that, we would have been back sooner. Yeah, I had what was it? It was a cousin's wedding reception that I went to that Saturday. And that would not really have been a problem, but they had an open taco buffet. And I'm afraid I may have overindulged.
You over-tacoed.
Yeah. So I was feeling the results of that the next day, and that combined with the fact that it was like 10 or 11 p.m., I was pretty tired. So I didn't think I could do my best, so I ended up punting.
That's fair. So if Agent Smith is at your party, your booze is going to be safe. Your tacos are going to be under attack. Good choice, though. Yeah, no worries. My sleep schedule's been a little bit off as well. I got to go to TwitchCon last weekend, and that was really fun. Eating a lot of food that I haven't had for a long time. There was a conveyor belt sushi restaurant, and man, you just grab the plates.
Swanky.
Yeah. We had one of the robots was serving drinks to people, and you push on a screen just at your table, like what drinks you want, and then the robot brings them out. And then the rest of the stuff gets put on a conveyor belt, which ends up passing you. And there's even a speedier conveyor belt for specific things that you want to order that aren't rotating around. So very, very fancy. In terms of like the quality of the sushi, it wasn't like super gourmet chef stuff. It was more like fast production, but definitely very good. I hadn't had sushi for a long time being vegan, so I was kind of making up for lost time.
Stands to reason.
Yeah.
So that's the first time you'd had sushi in how long?
Not the first time, but the first time I had overate eating sushi. I've been careful up to this point of like, I don't want to eat too much animal product or something just to not overload my system. I was kind of playing by those rules for a little bit.
Yeah.
But lately it's been more in the fuck it category.
Gotcha. I'm glad you had fun. That was TwitchCon, you said?
Yes.
Where was that this year?
San Diego.
San Diego. Okay.
Yeah, I got to hang and party with Chai, the streamer who I run the BG3 duo with. And it's kind of funny because that segment we roleplay our characters to be relatively hostile to each other and like a lot of aggressive banter. But in person, she could not have been more polite and easy to get along with. So,
Oh, yeah?
yeah, for people who don't quite read the performance there, yeah, it was a good time. Also, very similar taste in food and coffee, so it was easy for us to pick places to eat.
Nice.
There was one part of the area that we were in where there were 4 boba places, like all within 200 meters of each other. So we got to pick the best of the 4.
There you go.
I'm out here in South Dakota and being like, what's boba? No one knows what it is here.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in a little bit of a fine cuisine food desert up there.
Yeah. There was a bit of drama this year at TwitchCon. Specifically, probably the biggest item was a sexual assault of a streamer who was in the meet and greet kind of process. Yeah, so there's a line set up where people can wait and then go see a streamer and talk to them for a few moments and then take a picture and then leave. And there's this lady streamer who's talking to a fan, gets a photo with him, and then some other dude kind of skips the line, just walks up and tries to like make out or whatever. And then there's a security guy who ends up stepping in and pushing him away. But he definitely got into her personal space. And yeah, there wasn't really good defense set up there. So there's that, and then also just kind of the general frustration of you should treat people with respect and give them the space that they want. And even if you've been obsessing over a broadcaster for a long time online, doesn't mean that you have any like human to human connection to them until you've met them. And then just also like human boundaries and not going at people without consent. So I wrote a script for a video, and this is kind of like, I guess, early cutting room floor info. It's basically about a superhero who only knows how to like sniff out that kind of situation and then run at them and punch them in the face. He's kind of like a detective of just there's something like that about to happen, and he'll just end up showing up and punching the person in the face. Because a lot of times these situations occur, someone gets pressured, boundaries are crossed, and there's no justice for it, and it's really frustrating. So what if there was a guy who just showed up and consistently punched them in the face at a running speed? Like, how satisfying would that be? And I'm thinking like Quentin Tarantino, you overdo it a little bit to get some more catharsis for that situation. So it's going to be an IRL outside video. We have multiple cast members already confirmed, and I will be doing my own stunts for that.
Doing your own. How dangerous are these stunts?
Well, you have to run fast through the woods. Like, you could trip over and hurt yourself. And then you have to fake punch someone, and that person could get really punched. So I'm going to need one other cast member to do that. Another stunt actor. I have a guy, I think.
Well, it's not going to be me. I'm not doing much running these days.
Well, the villain only has to get punched. The villain doesn't have to run.
There you go.
So, yep, that's been my stuff lately. Kind of getting back into the Dota and StarCraft grinds as well.
Gotcha.
After traveling.
This Twitch stuff, the TwitchCon thing, that happened after the subathon ended?
Yes.
Okay, how did that go?
The subathon was great. We made it all the way to the end. So that's basically best case scenario. I think it was our maybe second most successful one that we've had.
Nice.
So good work, everyone. Got to see a lot of different games and situations. And we'll continue to do so.
Did you make it all the way through that huge-ass list of stuff to do?
We didn't make it through all the list. There are about, I think it's like 7 or so goals that were reached but have not yet been completed. So I have to make some videos. We're going to do hiking with Neuro pretty soon. Been focusing on getting rested and then... Oh no! Sorry, my opponent just messed up big time. Yeah.
Well, my condolences to your opponent.
Yeah, it's been a good time resting and resetting post crazy stream marathon. This was my first subathon in South Dakota.
Ah.
So it was a little bit of a different vibe in that sense.
Gotcha. Well, I was going to ask if you ever got to Sins of a Solar Empire.
I did not get to that one. I have
Gotcha.
to do Doom the Dark Ages, Doom Eternal DLC. Those are kind of like big ones that are right in front of me, and Expedition 33. And
Ooh.
with the PC upgrade, you'll be able to like play a lot of the new stuff at max settings, so that's cool.
Yeah.
Or at least on high.
I still haven't fully internalized that yet. That's so shocking.
Yeah, well, it'll hit when I send you the money. And you'd be like, oh, okay. But right now, it's just words, right? It's cheap talk. Anyone can say
As
I'm going
with
to...
so many things in life.
Yeah, anyone can say I'm just going to give you this pile of money, but until they actually give you the money, it's cheap talk.
Understood.
Yeah. Yeah, how's the world been? I haven't been super close tabs on stuff. Just like random tidbits of drama here and there. Like right now, the stuff floating around the internet is like trying to get you involved in some Trump casino gambling scam.
Yeah, unfortunately, the 21st century is full of many, many scams. Seems to be one of the defining characteristics. Well, I'll ask you, like, what are the big things that you've at least heard of over the past 3 weeks to 4 weeks?
3 to 4 weeks of big things. Dagneb said there are Argentina elections today or something.
Yeah.
I don't really think... Yeah, I don't really know. I've been, like, under a rock, basically.
Oh, okay. Well, I've got pretty good amount for you.
Nice.
Good chunk of it is the usual trade update and highlight reel. But we actually do have other stuff as well. And I did go to the trouble, since I kind of instigated last time, of looking up data about inequality and inflation in the United States. Because I think I said last time, like in the last minute before we left, that inequality is not as bad as people think. And so, of course, that's always kicking a hornet's nest on the internet. And there was some interest in kind of pursuing that line of reasoning. There was a desire for some elaboration there. So I did get some data on that, and we might get to that later if we have time. But it's a pretty sizable chunk to talk about, so we may not have time today. But it is in the pipeline, at least. That should be interesting. And a little bit different, since we don't do a whole lot of data analysis on here. So that could be fun.
Sweet.
Well, what have you heard about Israel-Palestine?
Nothing.
Nothing. Oh, this will be very interesting for you then. So what if I told you that, I guess to kind of cut to the chase here before I get into the details, what if I told you that all of the hostages Hamas was holding were released?
Really?
Really?
Oh.
They had been held for, what is it, 2 years, something like that? I don't
That's
know the
crazy.
exact time frame, but all of the ones that were alive and most of the ones that were not alive, since they don't have all of the bodies readily available, have been released. So their trial is finally over, for which everybody is, or at least should be, grateful.
Wow. Wait, when did that happen?
That was 2 weeks ago now, I want to say. I don't have the exact dates in front of me, just sort of the information. But yeah, that was part of a, what do I call it? Phase one of a peace deal, shall we say, that was signed between Hamas and Israel. That was largely the result of pressure by the Trump administration. And again, I'll kind of get into the details here in a second, but the general review, for those of you not familiar with this event, is that there was pressure on them. They agreed to the deal. And one of the provisions is that Hamas would release all of the live hostages. Well, all of the hostages, alive or dead. They're having some trouble finding some of the dead ones because, of course, Hamas didn't hold all of them. Some of them were killed and buried, etc. So there's been some difficulty there. But at the very least, my understanding is that all of the live ones have been released in our home.
Wow. That's
So
huge.
that was
That's a story I've been tracking for a while now.
Yeah. That's, October 23? Is that what it was? 23? Yeah, October 2023, when the conflict started with the Hamas raid, or whatever you want to call it, on southern Israel. I think there was about 20 left by the time of the release. So whatever people think about it, think about the overarching conflict and whatnot, everybody was pretty delighted to at least see them get out.
Yeah.
So let's see, what was, that was probably the biggest single headline you missed over the past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of get into that, let's see. So like I said, the Trump administration has kind of intermittently, over the past, 6 months, basically since he came back into office, trying to negotiate some kind of peace deal to end the conflict. Pretty unsuccessfully, since the Israeli government has not really been that interested for a variety of reasons, a lot of them political. And Hamas, of course, isn't really interested in giving big concessions, since, of course, the Israelis were asking for them to give up control of Gaza, disarm, all this other kind of stuff, which is kind of a red line, or at least a lot of it traditionally had been. So the talks were basically deadlocked. And the fighting had just kind of been dragging on interminably with no clear endpoint in sight. So eventually, some of the underlying variables that had been preventing progress in the talks changed. And so to get into some of those, for one, it was increasingly clear that the hostages didn't actually have that much value, at least for Hamas. When Hamas initially took them, again in October 23, the thinking it was, for one, that they would be able to exchange them for something, probably Palestinian prisoners, some of whom would have been members of Hamas, and maybe also for other concessions. They had also been hoping to sabotage negotiations between Israel and other states in the region in order to prevent normalization, quote unquote, of relations with Israel. And also, of course, holding the hostages meant that there was only so far the Israeli military could go in terms of kinetic operations without putting their lives at risk. over the course of the 2 years since then, it was increasingly clear that none of that was really going to happen. Probably the only aspect of that strategy that ended up panning out was the prisoners, which are going to be released as part of the peace deal, or at least phase one of the deal that's been agreed thus far. I'll get into the details of the actual agreement in a minute here. But normalization probably has only been delayed, not prevented. And the IDF has made it pretty clear, or at least the Netanyahu administration anyway, that they're not going to avoid going hard as far as the prosecution of the war with Hamas, just because they're holding hostages. And actually, hostages have been killed by the IDF at various points on account of that. So on the one hand, that's very unfortunate if you're a hostage or if you're a family member of a hostage. But the upshot of doing that is that Hamas doesn't really have much incentive to keep them if they can't really use them as a kind of human shield. So because the value of the hostages declined, not really as much reason to hold on to them. And also releasing them at this point comes with the upshot of taking away one of the Israeli government's main arguments for why they need the war to continue. One of their big arguments has been that they have to continue the war in Gaza because the hostages haven't been released yet. Well, now they have. So they're going to have to come up with a new excuse in order to continue the conflict, which is going to put them in a somewhat awkward diplomatic position. I don't think that's going to stop them. I think they're going to find that excuse eventually, one way or the other. But we can kind of talk about that later. For the moment, though, just know that Hamas didn't really see any reason to keep the hostages, and releasing them came with some strategic benefit internationally and diplomatically. So that's one of the reasons that the peace talks actually did progress to a point where we could see the hostages released. Another factor at play here was domestic politics in Israel. We've talked about this ad nauseum at this point for the past 2 years, but over the course of the conflict, the Israeli public has gotten increasingly skeptical that the Netanyahu administration is actually honest about its desire to end the conflict. There is a sense amongst many opponents of Netanyahu that he's only dragging the conflict out. Well, let me rephrase, that the conflict has only continued as long as it has because the Netanyahu administration has dragged the conflict out purposely for political reasons. So that opposition has grown with time, and that in turn has increased the pressure on Netanyahu to reach some kind of conclusion. This isn't necessarily going to be that conclusion, but it at least does take some of the political pressure off of him, since he at least seems to be moving that direction. Let's see. Also, Netanyahu's own coalition, his party is Likud, but it doesn't have enough seats to actually form a majority government, so it depends on a couple smaller far-right parties to actually reach a majority. That coalition is under increasing strain and has been for a couple of months now. For one, back in June, I think we may have talked about it, Israel's Supreme Court ruled that ultra-Orthodox men do have to do mandatory military service. That's been a big red line for far-right parties in Israel for a long time. They've been very adamant that the traditional exemption for those people should continue. That's been a very unpopular exemption for the rest of Israeli society. So that's kind of a benefit, so to speak, for most people. But Netanyahu doesn't depend on most people for his majority. He depends on the far right. And the fact that he has kind of not really pushed back here against the Supreme Court, since there had been an effort to do that kind of pushing back, there's been the whole debate about judicial reform in Israel. We talked about that at length a couple years ago, when the government made a big push towards that. And he kind of stepped away from that. He's kind of stepped away from that since then, but his far-right allies are upset about that because now they see the court ruling in June as being a direct result of his not being hard enough on the Supreme Court. So that's created pressure from the far right to take action. And also, by giving in here, so to speak, by actually conceding to international pressure to reach this deal, he can kind of go to his far right allies and say, hey, I had no choice. This isn't something I want to do. It's something that I was forced to do by the Trump administration and the broader international community. So you can see this as a kind of tactical maneuver to try to alleviate pressure from the far right, which was angry with him over the Supreme Court issue, the ruling, etc. That itself kind of betrays the fact that this is probably a short-term maneuver, not a long-term change in his preferred approach to dealing with Gaza, Hamas, and the broader Palestinian issue. But the short-term calculus here was in favor of concessions and a deal, so that was a contributing factor as well. Going beyond domestic Israeli politics, we could talk a little more about the international pressure that was only growing over time. And it applied also to Hamas. The Arab League had actually come out in July and called on Hamas to disarm and actually end its control of Gaza. And they also condemned the October 7th attack, which is the first time that they'd actually done that in terms that were quite so explicit. So Hamas's traditional, I don't want to say backers quite, because the GCC certainly doesn't back them really. But the fact that the Arab League as a whole actually kind of was increasing pressure was a big problem for Hamas, because they do depend on international pressure, international support to a degree to continue operations. On the Israeli side, there was a lot, they were experiencing growing pressure from Europe, not so much the United States, but there was a growing number of European states, as well as others like Australia, that were threatening to recognize a Palestinian state or had already done so. And that pressure was only growing. They were almost certainly going to move beyond just recognition of Palestine to potentially sanctions at some point. So both the Palestinian, well, I should say Hamas, both Hamas and the Israeli government had incentive on account of international pressure to progress here. That pressure had kind of always been there, so this isn't really like a critical variable here, but it is a factor. So Trump himself is one of the big factors here. Traditionally, the Israeli government just kind of blows off American governments when they put pressure on them, or they pacify them. The Israeli government, under various administrations over the past 50 years, has gotten very good at that. But they started to overplay their hand a little bit, from what I was reading. For one, people in the Trump administration felt like the Israelis were treating them like the Biden administration, which that's a direct quote. And of course, they didn't really appreciate that. They thought that, the Biden administration, we don't mind you fucking around with, but when you're dealing with us, you should actually be much more cooperative. And they didn't get that sense. And of course, the Trump administration is very sort of egotistical when dealing with international issues like this. They feel like if they're not getting their due, then they have a right to kind of come down hard on you. So another factor there, kind of pushing this interpersonal enmity, was the strikes in Qatar, which surprised me. If you don't remember this, the Israeli government actually launched an airstrike on Hamas negotiators in Qatar. Qatar has kind of long been a place where Hamas leadership has been able to reside without worry of being molested. The Qatari government kind of gives them asylum to a degree. And for the Israeli government to go out and actually launch an unsanctioned airstrike on Qatar was very, very forward. That was a very bold move. And my assumption at the time is that they either had implicit or explicit consent from the U.S. government. And there were rumors that they may have also had the consent of the Qatari government even. But more recently, there's been word that the Trump administration actually did not give its consent to that they were not given forewarning at all, and that Trump himself was allegedly very upset about it, to the point where he kind of made it his personal business to intercede, talk to the Qatari government leadership, and to try to kind of pacify them by saying that that they had an explicit security guarantee from the United States. And I had thought at the time that was just sort of damage control in the wake of the airstrike. But I've read more recently that it was directed specifically at the Israeli government as a warning not to do that again. So the Trump administration derived some leverage from this, the fact that the president himself was sort of personally affronted here and was able then to kind of go to the Israelis and say, you're not in our good graces at this point, and if you keep doing this and don't give us something, then we're going to significantly ramp up the pressure on you. And that's a credible threat for Trump, more so than other presidents, because for one, he's a Republican. Democrats can't really do that because they'll be accused of being weak on national security and whatnot. But with Trump, he kind of leads the party of national security. And of course, he himself has a very strong ability to whip, is technically the political term, to basically get Republican senators and House reps to vote the way he wants. And of course, there's already a built-in sort of Israel skeptic crowd within the Democrats that would also vote against Israel given the opportunity. So Trump has a majority, so to speak, within the American government that could significantly and credibly threaten to increase pressure on Israel in the form of cutting off aid, sanctions, etc., whatever kind of pressure that they would want. And it seems like Trump brought some of that credible threat to bear here, such that the Netanyahu administration felt that there was enough pressure that they could kind of give ground on this. Not just because they had to, but also, again, as mentioned before, because Netanyahu could credibly go to his allies and say, hey, I'm being forced to do this, I have no choice. Let's see, a couple other factors here, just two more. One, just general exhaustion. The war's gone on for 2 years now. The Israelis have taken way more casualties than they would normally in these sort of Gaza bush wars. There's been a number of them over the years, but this is easily the one that's been the most expensive and costly, both in terms of actual financial cost, but also in terms of bloodshed. I have in my notes here that Israel has lost 466 soldiers thus far, which not that high if you're an American, but if you're Israel, a much smaller country, that's a lot. Much more so than any other conflict they've had probably since the 70s. Also, I have here, there was a recent poll where 2/3 of Israelis favored a ceasefire. Let's see. Also, Hamas made a concession that made the deal palatable for the Israeli government to a much greater degree than they had before, basically. Before, Hamas had been demanding full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. As part of the new deal, they have given that up. And instead, the Israelis are only going to partially withdraw from Gaza. I think they're calling it the yellow line. That's the line they agreed to withdraw from. So they're still present in about half of Gaza, but in the other half, Hamas is going to have free reign again. So on account of all these changes to some of the underlying factors that had been preventing a deal was able to progress. It was a combination of internal pressure from domestic Israeli political actors, both coalition allies of Netanyahu as well as his opposition, international pressure, which had just kind of been ongoing, and then the Trump administration heaping the pressure on in the wake of something that aggravated the president, basically to the point where he was able to kind of credibly threaten to retaliate to some degree. So all of that combined to finally allow the stars to align such that phase one, at least, of the deal can go forward. Another thing here is that there was a lot of reluctance to move forward without all of the details of all of the stages of the peace agreement being agreed to. But the Trump administration insisted that at least phase one of the deal go forward, even if all of the details weren't worked out. Some of the veterans of the Biden administration noted that this is very, very similar to the ceasefire that they worked out right at the end of the Biden administration. They argue that Trump is basically just taking credit for doing something that they had already done and something that he himself had kind of sabotaged to a degree at the beginning of his administration. There might be a little bit of sour grapes there because, it is true that the Trump administration probably could have done more to sustain the ceasefire negotiated at the end of the Biden administration, but at the same time, that shouldn't take away from the fact that there has been progress made here. But they are right that the deal is broadly similar to the deal that Biden was able to negotiate, which was basically a short-term ceasefire and then negotiate the details for a full end of the conflict later. That's more or less what's happening now. So what was actually in the agreement? Again, this is just phase one, so this is all of the low-hanging fruit congregated in one place. For one, ceasefire, the fighting will stop. That mostly has happened, but there's been some exceptions. Not surprising if you're familiar with Israel-Hamas conflicts. There's almost always ceasefire violations to one degree or another. But broadly speaking, the ceasefire has held. So for the most part, the fighting has stopped. Partial withdrawal from Gaza, already discussed that. Hamas will free all remaining hostages, and they will do so in exchange for several hundred prisoners held by Israel. Also, there is supposed to be a large increase in the supply of aid to Gaza. Supposedly, the Israelis were supposed to significantly increase the number of trucks that they were allowing in. So this is the broad outline of the agreement. Like I mentioned, though, there were a lot of details that were left out in the early stages. Most of those details regarded later stages of the plan, but some of them actually even encompassed elements of phase one. So, for example, when the ceasefire went into effect, the list of Palestinians that was supposed to be released in exchange for the hostages had actually not yet been finalized. They didn't really even know who they were supposed to release yet. Also, there's been no consensus yet of any kind, virtually, as to how Gaza is going to be governed in the future. There's kind of a general sense that it can't be Hamas, but there is, as of yet, no real alternative that has been agreed to. There's also no clear path for what Hamas itself will be asked to do. The Israelis have been asking, basically, for the past 2 years, that Hamas, if nothing else, has to disarm. And Hamas has categorically rejected that at every turn. So it's not clear how that's going to pan out. Let's see, other elements here that are unclear. The far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition are dead set opposed to any kind of deal with Hamas. And so it's not clear how that will work out. Whatever kind of deal with Hamas itself that ends up clarifying Hamas's status and the governance of Gaza, that might get shot down by Netanyahu's coalition partners because they are hell-bent on continuing the war, and they've been very vocal about that. That's not me projecting on them. They have said as much. They want the war to continue, and they are opposed to this peace process.
Damn.
So it's not clear how that aspect is going to interact with the peace process at this point going forward. So that's a broad look at the deal, what it does and what it doesn't do. How has it played out in practice? So some of the details here. For one, since the fighting has stopped and since the IDF has cleared out of half of Gaza, Hamas has taken the opportunity to launch a crackdown. Of course, the IDF and the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, has been very active on the ground trying to collect information to find targets. That invariably means paying people off, finding defectors, informants, etc. So Hamas generally tries to clamp down on that as much as it can. It's hard to do that when you're getting blown up by the IDF, but since the fighting has stopped, that's created a little more room for them to focus on finding saboteurs, informants, etc. And so they have been very actively trying to root out anybody and everybody who they think might be working with the Israelis. And the result has been a whole bunch of footage of them publicly executing people, which, of course, the Israeli government is very happy to advertise as an example of them abusing the ceasefire. The Trump administration apparently doesn't agree with that assessment. Trump himself has apparently, excuse me, Trump himself has apparently given consent to this. He said that he's okay with Hamas reasserting some degree of control over Gaza, albeit temporarily. I think I have the specific quote here. They do want to stop the problems, and they've been open about it, and we gave them approval for a period of time. And we gave them approval for a period of time. So this is apparently happening with an okay from the U.S. government. Again, temporarily. If you're wondering what he means by problems, Hamas generally tries to justify this in terms of people stealing aid. There's been a big problem with criminals attacking aid convoys and stealing them and then selling them on the black market. Hamas itself may be indulging in that to a degree. It's not entirely clear. Regardless, law and order is definitely broken down, has definitely broken down in Gaza. So Hamas, whatever its role in the black market, can credibly claim that it doesn't entirely have the capacity to police aid and the distribution thereof within Gaza. And so part of the reason they want to kind of crack down here is supposedly to crack down on those elements. But like I said, a lot of the public executions that they've been putting on social media have been people they accuse of collaboration. So that's not to say that they have not also been cracking down on the criminal element. They have been doing that. And I did have some notes on some of the specific clans they've been going after. The Abu Shabab clan, the Al Majida clan, and Rami Halis. Apparently, these are all local, geographically concentrated clans. Two of them are located in IDF-controlled territory, and it's been rumored that they have Israeli backing. The Israelis have been looking for local allies who have been willing to turn against Hamas. They haven't been particularly successful, but there have been some elements there that have turned on Hamas, and Hamas is taking the opportunity to try to crack down on them as much as possible as well. Mm. There's another clan here that is not geographically concentrated. They're just kind of located throughout Gaza. That's the Dokmash clan. I'm butchering the pronunciation, so I apologize. They've been targeting them as well. I don't think it's the entire clan. It's basically elements thereof. But some of the elements of that clan have been working against Hamas, basically. Hamas says that they're, raiding aid, working with the Israelis, but it's not clear how true that is. Let's see. So some of the early problems in the aftermath of the agreement's implementation, beyond Hamas, killing people, as part of an internal crackdown. There's been criticism of Israel not owning up to its agreements regarding increase in the pace of aid. They were supposed to kind of open up border crossings and allow in significantly more trucks. Critics say that hasn't happened yet. They also say that border crossings haven't been opened up to allow some Gazans out for medical treatment. And I think I mentioned this before, but it merits mentioning again. Hamas has not handed over all of the dead bodies of some of the dead hostages. Hamas says that they're just having trouble for technical reasons, because again, some of the bodies were just lost over the course of the fighting, airstrikes, burying people, whatnot. Also, Hamas, again, didn't actually hold all of the hostages. Some of them were held by other militant groups that were not under the direct control of Hamas. And so, of course, coordinating with them can be difficult at times. There was also one body that was handed over that turned out not to be the body of a hostage. The Israelis, of course, do testing on all of the bodies because they don't trust Hamas for shit for obvious reasons. And so one of them was found to not be a hostage. And of course, that led to a whole kerfuffle about whether or not Hamas was trying to cheat the Israeli government here. And the Israelis demanded that they hand over the correct bodies, so to speak.
You have a bad operation going when you're misplacing dead bodies. It's like, what are you doing? Why are you killing people? You're misplacing your dead bodies. You can't even own up to who you killed. You killed too many people. You're mixing them up now. Oh, jeez.
Well, it probably has more to do with the collapse of their command and control, because, of course, that was targeted very early in the war and mostly destroyed. That can make it very difficult for any kind of administrative activity of any sort. So the leadership is just very mixed, decentralized, isolated. Basically, Hamas was broken up into a series of cells that operate more or less autonomously with very little overarching central leadership or guidance. So that, administratively speaking, is the bigger difficulty, probably. But yes, you're correct. Their ability to kind of oversee things like that is pretty bad at this point, significantly degraded. Let's see, we already talked about ceasefire violations. Those have kind of been on again, off again. Mostly it's been, from what I've read, the Israelis hitting people that are crossing the yellow line. So the Israelis say that they're willing to withdraw to the yellow line, but they don't want any Gazans crossing it. And of course, with the ceasefire in place, some people want to go back to their homes and have been trying to get to them, even if they're on the other side of the line. And that's led to incidents where the Israelis attack them because they're in violation of the agreement. There's also been incidents where the Israelis say they were fired upon, but who knows? both Hamas and the Israeli government tend to lie their ass off about these things, so that's not entirely clear. But supposedly that's been happening as well. Hamas, for its part, claims that the Yellow Line, actually not just Hamas, also just people in Gaza, claim that the Yellow Line is not clearly demarcated, which can make it hard for people who want to stay on the right side of the line but don't realize sometimes when they're crossing it. And let's see, the final note I have here on this is negotiations for the International Stabilization Force. Talks about an international stabilization force actually predate this agreement. There have been talk, this has to do basically with governance of Gaza, who's going to take over Gaza when the war ends, because obviously Hamas should not be it. That's the general consensus. But the only real traction on that has been a vague notion of some kind of ambiguously defined international stabilization force that will move in, govern Gaza temporarily, and do so until some kind of alternative for the long term can be worked out. So the International Stabilization Force is going to be, it seems, part of this peace agreement. But like with many other aspects of it, the details have yet to be worked out. There was supposed to be a summit where there would be progress on this some weeks ago, but it went exactly nowhere. And that seems to be pretty much the trajectory at this point, nowhere. So that's something that's probably going to take months to work out, assuming it's ever worked out, which it may not be. So with that, you are pretty much up to date on this, Neuro.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that I didn't accidentally hear about that. I had people in the chat saying, "How did you not hear about this?" And I'm like, I don't know.
You're a busy man. It's understandable. Also, you're not chronically online. Technically. Yeah. Well, I guess technically you are online all the time, but not in the bad way, not in the chronically online sort of way that people mean with that term.
Yeah, well,
so
this is my news feed, and if we don't do a segment, I'm just like in the dark.
Gotcha.
I don't know what's happening.
So with the update complete, I'll kind of throw in some prognosis here. I can't prove it, but I would bet that the fighting is going to resume. I don't think the ceasefire is going to hold. Technically, the hostages have been released. That is nominally the main casus belli for the Israeli government. But again, like I mentioned, there's a lot of other factors at play here. Netanyahu's coalition, specifically his smaller far-right partners, is heaping pressure on him to continue the war. They have absolutist goals as far as the future of Gaza and Hamas. They want Hamas completely obliterated. And they also have ulterior motives in the form of returning settlements to Gaza. And potentially, if they can find some kind of way to rationalize their way into it, expelling the population so that they can annex it formally. That's something far-right parties in Israel have long wanted, and they were bitterly, bitterly opposed to the Israeli withdrawal of settlements from Gaza back under the Ariel Sharon administration back in the day. So they see this as their opportunity to try to get that land back, if not more. So Netanyahu has pressure from the right in that regard, and he himself is kind of an opportunist with these things. If there's an opportunity here, an excuse to kind of go full tilt boogie in Gaza and potentially get rid of Hamas, or at least significantly degrade them, he's going to take it. And he may think that his opponents in Israel, who think the war needs to come to a conclusion, especially now that the hostages are freed, are being unrealistic, are being naive, that if he doesn't go hard and get rid of Hamas now, he may not have the opportunity again later, and things may just go back to the status quo, where Hamas just kind of perpetually over time needle pricks Israel. That's not an existential threat to Israel like Netanyahu pretends it is. I think even he would admit that if he were being honest. But at the same time, that's not normal to be in this sort of constant pseudo conflict where rockets are intermittently fired at you and occasionally people die. the Israeli government sees as its ultimate objective full normalization with all parties in the Middle East, such that Israelis can live normal lives. And Netanyahu doesn't think that's going to happen, I suspect, if the war concludes as things stand now. I think he wants to go further and has maximalist objectives that he is not willing to publicly divulge. Now, again, like I said, I can't prove any of that. That's just my suspicion based off of Netanyahu, his party, and the history of the governing philosophy of those groups. There is kind of a trend line. I talked about this last time, I think, but there is sort of a through line going back you can trace it all the way back to the Zionist movement in the late 19th century, in which there is a sort of subset of Israeli politics that is hell-bent on being as aggressive as possible and as necessary to get and secure land. And they see every conflict that emerges with Arab neighbors of whatever kind as an opportunity to promulgate that objective. Now, that's not in accordance with how most people in Israel feel about it. There's been different schools of thought about how to deal with Israel's unique problem with its neighbors, how to deal with the Palestinians, how to deal with the land, et cetera, et cetera. But the one that's been ascendant for the past 40-some years has very much been the Likud school of thought on this, or at least the school of thought that is currently embodied by Likud and Netanyahu. You can go back all the way to Begin. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name. I never learned it, but I want to say his name was Menachem Begin. He was prime minister back in the day, and he himself was very much part of this sort of school of thought and this part of Israeli politics. He himself actually was a former terrorist, to give you an idea of the kind of people this part of Israeli politics attracts. And they've been very successful politically for a variety of reasons, and Netanyahu is just sort of the latest incarnation and iteration of that. And having kind of read about how they deal with Israeli politics and how they deal with Israeli foreign policy and the Palestinians over the past 50, if not further back, years, yeah, I have like pretty, I don't want to say full confidence. I can't say it's with 100%, but I'm pretty confident they're going to start the war back up. I think they're going to try to find an excuse to do it, since Trump himself has kind of attached his ego to this. And of course, then you can't really openly go against him without incurring his egotistical wrath. But that doesn't mean they won't. I think instead what they'll do is they'll try to find something Hamas does and use that as an excuse. And given how degraded Hamas's leadership structure is, and given how radical Hamas is, they are technically militants. I don't doubt that at some point, somebody within Hamas, if not just the leadership in general, is going to give the Israelis the excuse they need. And I believe that when they have it, they're going to run with it. Now, that's all speculation. We'll see what happens. Maybe the optimists will be right, and actually the conflict will reach some kind of peaceable conclusion. And Israeli-Gaza, if not Israeli-Palestinian relations generally, will be put on a positive path. But if you're looking for optimism in the Israeli-Palestine conflict, you're really looking in the wrong place. There's nothing in the conflict for the past 100 years that's ever really justified optimism. So I don't think this is going to be any different. But we'll see. We shall see. That's my prognosis for it for now. Hopefully something will change to change my mind, but for now I'm very pessimistic about how this is going to play out. Best thing that's going to come out of this is the hostages. At the very least, they're out. So whatever else happens, they're at least safe, finally.
Well, thanks for that big update. It's a lot of stuff happening.
Yes and no. Yes, it's a big major development, but if I'm right, then we're going to be back at the status quo before too long. And this will just be a blip. It's a positive blip, but I suspect it will just be a blip when all is said and done. So let's see, that's Israel-Palestine. Let's see, I don't think there's been too many other big headline things. Did you read about the government shutdown?
No.
Oh, were you aware the U.S. government had shut down?
No,
Oh, okay.
I am now.
Yeah, that is a big headline for the United States. I think for the past 2 weeks now. Yeah, I'm sure you're aware that the budget process for the federal government is kind of broken and has been for a while. We basically just haven't had a proper annual fiscal budget pass as normal in years. It's happened over the past 10 years, but it's kind of been the exception to the rule. And of course, this year is no exception, and it's been particularly contentious. And so we've had continuing resolutions that have funded the government for the short term, but nothing permanent, nothing that's actually been for the full year. And the deadline for the last continuing resolution passed 2 weeks ago, and there was basically no agreement on a new one. The negotiations failed, and so the government shut down again. So we've been doing that for the past 2 weeks. A lot of well, I should say a lot of federal services have had to shut down. People with critical roles basically have still been required to come in, but everybody else is not getting paid. So the question is, how does this resolve itself this time? It's not really clear, and this one could actually drag out for a while because both the Democrats and Republicans kind of think they have the upper hand from what I was reading. And when I say Democrats and Republicans, I mean the leadership in the House of Representatives and the Senate. The big sticking point that kind of triggered the shutdown and the failure of negotiations for a new continuing resolution had to do with Obamacare subsidies. I don't know how much of that you remember, but one of the big cornerstones of the Affordable Care Act, if I'm remembering correctly, basically Obamacare, were exchanges in which people could purchase health care that had to fit some kind of fixed standard in order to be listed on the exchange. And of course, they had. Sorry, what?
I sneezed. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. And they had like bronze plans, silver plans, etc. They had different tiers. But if you wanted your plan to be listed on the exchange, it had to fit one of the sort of pre-designed plans and meet certain conditions. So a big aspect of that was subsidies. It wasn't just that people would get to choose from plans on the exchange, but so long as you were below a certain level of income, the federal government would actually help you pay for it. I think a lot of people either weren't aware of that and maybe still aren't aware of that and haven't been using it. But regardless, that was supposed to help subsidize consumption of healthcare, basically, for people in the lowest income brackets. Now, that subsidy was always came with a sunset provision, basically, and that deadline is coming up technically. And Democrats have been adamant that the subsidies be extended, and the Republican Party is just as adamant that it either end or that it be watered down. And so that's where the debate is. Like, how do we change this, if at all? Do we extend it? Do we scrap it completely? Democratic and Republican leadership just failed utterly to kind of deal with that. And both parties continue to feel, as they felt at the time, that if a government shutdown did come to pass, that voters would be inclined to blame the other party. So this is a little unusual because generally going into these shutdowns, one party or the other has a sense that they will be blamed more than the other one. But the reason people are especially pessimistic about this shutdown is that both parties feel like the data, that is to say polling and whatnot, suggests that they are that they have the advantage. And so there's a kind of catch-22. There's sort of a deadlock. And that seems likely to continue for the foreseeable future. Negotiations probably are happening behind the scenes, and I have read that there are potential concessions that could be made. I think the one that I read about is that the subsidies could be extended, but that eligibility could be restricted. That is to say, the threshold of income would be lowered so that fewer people would be eligible. So probably whatever compromise is reached will look something like that. But at this point, it's unclear. And again, we're not really getting all the details about any ongoing negotiations. They say there aren't any, but they're liars, so I don't believe them. In the meantime, there's a great deal of gnashing of teeth about the cutoff of federal services, federal workers not getting paid, and who should be blamed. Reddit, of course, is in full partisan mode on that. If you spend any time there in the past couple weeks, you've almost certainly seen posts very explicitly blaming one party or the other. Given that it's Reddit, it's mostly the Republicans they're blaming. But the needle just hasn't moved yet. So this is just going to be an ongoing problem until something changes, presumably a deal of the kind that I mentioned.
Yeah, we don't really have a enthusiasm around compromise and meeting in the middle on stuff. That's not cool right now.
I did have some highlight reel adjacent stuff that relates to this, and it kind of has to do with how the Trump administration is running the government in lieu of a budget. For one, the Trump administration is trying to pressure Democrats into, as they put it, reopening the government, because they, of course, blame them. The Trump administration is threatening, that they're going to specifically shut down, quote unquote, Democrat programs if Democrats do not agree to open up the government again. I don't know that there's actually been any action on this yet. I don't think there's specific examples. Maybe somebody in chat knows better than me on that. But the fact that the executive is threatening to cull very particular programs for partisan political reasons is not especially legal. And certainly it's not within the spirit of good governance. This is one of those norms that the Trump administration is breaching for partisan political reasons. Also, in this vein, the Trump administration said that it's going to continue to pay military personnel, even though they have not been allocated the money to do so, which is also illegal. They're not allowed to do that. There wasn't much traction on that threat either. But then it came out that apparently somebody gave over $100 million to the Trump administration so that they could continue to pay military personnel. Now, I would point out here that this is actually still illegal. You can get donations, whatever, of one kind or another as the executive. That's fine. But you can't use them unless Congress explicitly says that they're allowed to. That's just part of the division of powers between the executive and the legislative branches. The Trump administration, as always, doesn't give a shit. And they say that they're going to move forward and use the money to pay military personnel so that they will not be affected by the shutdown. So as with many things on the highlight reel, this is another example of rule of law being eroded, and also with norms of government being violated for political expediency. Not that dramatic in the short term or in any given isolated case, but over time, this erodes overall rule of law in a way that's going to have dramatically negative impacts on, one, the health of the political culture, and two, the viability and integrity of political institutions at the federal level, if not also lower levels as well.
Degrades trust. I get it. Faith that people will follow the law.
Let's see. So that's basically the shutdown. That's your update there. There's been trade stuff happening, but there's a lot of it. And of course, a good chunk of it is stupid.
Stupid trade.
Well, trade policy specifically. Before we get into that, it might be better to kind of jump into some of the big international stories. I don't want the whole thing just to be US and Trump again and again.
Yeah, that's fair.
I wouldn't mind that, but people in chat don't seem to like it. So in deference to them, I try to diversify. But yeah, let's see. I think Dagnip actually mentioned already, you said Dagnip mentioned Argentine elections.
Yes.
Yeah, there has been some drama there. That's actually partly related to the highlight reel as well. So let's see. I think we talked last time about the swap agreement with Argentina. Do you
The
remember
money
that at
swap,
all?
yeah.
Yeah. So that was a $20 billion swap that injected equivalent funds into the Argentine central bank, which freed up funds for the Argentine government to try to do damage control on the basically a speculative run on their currency, which was causing a big devaluation and undermining the government's reform plans, in so much as it was boosting inflation, which the government was trying to reduce. So there was some question about how political this effort to give money to Argentina was. It's very political. There's no inherent reason for the United States government to do that. Yes, Argentina is technically an ally, but that's been true for the past, like half century. And I'm not aware of any broader effort to go out of the US government's way to help Argentina out like this during one of their economic kerfuffles, of which they have many. But Trump, for what are apparently personal reasons, some kind of personal investment in his relationship with the president of Argentina, Milei, has been going out of his way to help them. The swap agreement was the first iteration of that. Since then, they have actually freed up an additional $20 billion for Argentina. That was an initiative by the Treasury Department under Besant, who has just kind of bought Argentine bonds and currency for, near as I can tell, what I can best describe as reasons. I don't know what the reasons are. I don't know that Secretary Besant knows what the reasons are. But Trump wills it, and so the Secretary of the Treasury has made that happen. Another $20 billion for Argentina for reasons. There was some debate, I think, last time in chat, specifically from Dagnep, about whether or not any of this money, specifically the swap agreement, would actually come into play before the elections. There was some talk about it potentially not happening until after. And I said I was pretty skeptical about that, but I hadn't heard anything specific. Since then, the matter has been made very clear. The money has definitely been freed up before the elections. So pretty much as I expected. So Milei has been getting assistance. Yet, the Argentine economy is getting significant injections of funds here. But the speculative run has continued. The market is really not convinced any of this is going to be enough. So again, as we talked about last time, the speculative run was triggered by local elections in Argentina in which Milei's party did poorly. And given that general legislative elections at the national level were only months away, markets kind of bugged out. There was a sense that Milei's party would get clobbered, and that if that was the case, then Milei's reforms would come to a crashing halt, and that Argentina's debt and inflation problem would resume a downward trajectory, and that it was better, if that was the case, if that does come to pass, to get their money out of the market early. Hence all of the selling of Argentine bonds and currency and whatnot. So that election is happening as we speak. It was scheduled for Sunday. I don't know the results or if they've even been called yet. I'm sure people in chat probably, Dagnip, if he's here, probably knows. But that's going to have a big impact on market perceptions and in turn on whether or not the speculative run continues. But the Trump-Argentine drama continues, and certainly social media has been very upset about it in the United States. A lot of people have been making fun of the fact that, the government is not open, the Trump administration can't, or in some cases isn't, paying people, but apparently does have $40 billion to just give to his buddy in Argentina.
You need some money? I'll get you some money. He's a lot of money.
Oh. Yeah, I guess I did have a little more Israel-Palestine stuff, but this is just stuff that predated the agreement. Obviously, the agreement has been the main headline. Before that, the other big headline out of Israel and Palestine was the flotilla. This isn't the first one. Occasionally, activists will get together and gather as many boats as they can. These are just small boats, personal boats of one kind or another. Load them up with humanitarian aid and try to just sail to Gaza and give people that aid. And of course, Israel has a blockade and so doesn't want that. And so what happens is that there's a very visual display of the Israelis stopping aid from getting to Gaza that, of course, Israel's opponents use as, kind of evidence that they don't care about the people of Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it's a kind of PR thing. It's about optics. So, as expected, this particular iteration, this newest flotilla, set sail, I think mostly from Italy, actually, and was intercepted by the IDF. The people on the boats were detained, the aid confiscated, and then, of course, people were then released. So everything played out pretty much as expected. There wasn't really any drama. The Israelis have kind of learned how to handle these flotillas by now. There was a big blow up, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, when there was footage of, I think it was special forces, I don't remember exactly, but basically Israeli soldiers dropping onto a boat from a helicopter and then getting into a fight with the protesters, basically the activists on board. And I think one of them ended up getting shot. So the whole thing looked really bad for the Israelis. And they've since learned how to handle this much, much more deftly. They don't, drop from helicopters. They don't rope down like they used to. Now it's mostly, I think, handled by the Israeli Coast Guard. I think, do you remember Greta Thunberg? What was her name?
It's not ringing a bell.
Yeah, she was the climate change activist, young teenager, made the rounds for a long time. First name Greta. She was actually Time Magazine's Person of the Year, I think, at one point. Wow. Well, anyway, she was in the flotilla. She's apparently expanded beyond just climate change. So that brought additional international press. Otherwise, it might not have gotten as much. The only other tidbit I have here is that for some reason that I don't fully understand, maybe somebody in chat can clear this up for me, but this flotilla was headline news in Italy. Everywhere else it was in the news, but it wasn't really a main item. But news agencies in Italy apparently gave a whole bunch of coverage to the flotilla. And apparently when the Israelis started detaining people as the flotilla approached Gaza, there's a lot of people that got angry about it in Italy because it was getting so much attention. So for most everybody else, it was just business as usual. Again, this is not the first flotilla that has tried to do this. But apparently Italy is uniquely invested in this flotilla, and so it has gotten disproportionate attention for that reason. Now, again, all of that was weeks and weeks ago before the ceasefire. So that story has kind of long since faded.
I see.
Let's see, I have queued up here Japan, Germany, and France. Have you heard anything about them?
No.
Okay, so Japan has a new prime minister. France has kind of a new president. Well, not a new prime minister. Again, kind of. It's very complicated. We'll get into that. Germany is less dramatic. They've just kind of been having trouble in their ruling coalition agreeing on how to do fucking anything. Not that surprising, given how German politics has been for the past couple decades, but I think people were hoping for more this time, especially given the stakes now. But yeah, that's what I have queued up here. Which did you want to do first?
Do Germany.
Germany, okay. Oh, did you want a fun statistic first? I got that too here.
Sure,
kind of jammed in between the other items.
What is it?
Let's see. I don't have the source here for some reason. Normally I do, but it's probably from one of the newsletters I'm subscribed to. So I'll just read it verbatim for you. AI-related enterprises have accounted for 80% of the stunning gains in the American stock market this year.
Wow. 80%?
80%.
Wow.
And in addition to that, Gartner, and it's an analytical group, estimates global spending on artificial intelligence will likely reach a whopping $1.5 trillion before 2025 is out.
Wow.
Yeah, the private sector is spending big money on AI these days and has been for a while. Yeah, this isn't really Germany. I'm kind of getting away from it, but there's been a lot more talk over the past month about a bubble in the US stock market, specifically an AI bubble. And some of it has to do with a Bloomberg piece that was published a couple weeks ago that kind of delved into the circular nature of demand for artificial intelligence chips. Excuse me. Basically, I haven't read the article in question. I've just read about it and some of the argumentation therein. But basically, there are AI firms that are developing models. They don't make the chips that they use. Those are made by different firms. NVIDIA is the main one. And then there's also the firms that actually build the data processing centers that the AI firms are using, but do not themselves own. Very frequently, the actual hardware that's being used is owned by a different company that then leases out the hardware to the AI firm. So what's happening is that all these different firms are basically investing in each other in a way that the author of the Bloomberg article argues is basically creating a circular loop. One firm invests in the other, that in turn, basically individual projects, I should say. NVIDIA, for example, will invest in AI firms, and of course, that project will result in additional demand for chips because they have to set up a new data center for it, and that in turn creates more demand for NVIDIA's project. So there allegedly is a lot of that going on that is creating false value. It's kind of self-perpetuating in a way that is not sustainable. Now, I read a critique of that from some economists that argues that that's not entirely justified. I'm not familiar enough with the details of the market structure of AI and whatnot to really get into it in a way that's authoritative. But the critique I read suggested that there is enough substantive value being produced by AI firms that the circular nature of, the nature of the deals is not truly circular, is how they put it. Basically, while the projects do have a circular element to them in so much as they propagate the bubble, and I think economists agree that there is a bubble at this point, but the bubble is not being propagated by these circular agreements like the Bloomberg article argued. The critique argued rather that the projects that are being invested in are substantive. It's possible for there to be these kinds of circular agreements that propagate bubbles in a way that's not sustainable. But they argue that this is not one of them, that these agreements are substantive and while they do contribute to a degree to the bubble, will themselves return value at some point. So in other words, to put this more succinctly, the different companies involved in the AI bubble, the AI firms, the cloud firms, the chip firms, et cetera, they're not faking it. They are actually making substantive investments here. They are not investing just to propagate the bubble, like the Bloomberg article insinuated. Now, again, I'm not an authority figure on this, so I'm not going to come down one way or the other. I'm not going to come down on the side of the Bloomberg article and say, yeah, this is definitely a bubble, and these different firms are engaging in shadowy activity, basically to try to propagate it. And I'm not going to come down on the side of the critics, because while they probably do have a point, I can't really verify it without more data. I would need a much stronger background analyzing the market in question. But that has been kind of the hot and sexy as far as news about the AI bubble and the overarching American economy here. So this data point about the stock market being disproportionately dependent on AI, that ties into that, which is why I brought it up. I just wanted to kind of contextualize the data point for you.
Nice.
So anyway, we can all look forward to a massive stock market crash at some point. That's kind of the takeaway there. There seems to be a growing consensus that that is going to happen at some point. Not clear when, but at some point, everybody's going to get wrecked financially.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's because it's an emerging tech. AI is a very broad term for different things you can do and how you can do them, but it seems like a lot of things in the future are going to utilize AI, so people are sort of just throwing heaps of money at it, wanting to invest in the future, it seems like, but not really understanding fully where the development is, what the limits of it are. Is it actually AI or is it a company in India? It's just people working on stuff.
You remember that?
Yeah, that was really funny.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just, it's a little just too early for AI to be said to be truly useful. There have been useful applications found, but the amount of money being poured into it does not seem, it doesn't seem like they're going to get their money back. Like, as useful as it might end up becoming, the idea that it's going to be like $1.5 trillion worth of value generated once they finally get everything ready for prime time, that seems outlandish to me and to a lot of other people, hence all of the discussion about a bubble. So yes, there's value to be had. They are producing a tangible product that has been found useful in certain niche uses. But it's just not clear that it justifies all of the investment. Like, I've heard people say that data centers are sort of the new factories of the 21st century, and that we should be, the government should be getting involved in subsidizing them, and that people should be trying to attract data centers as those their factories, like they're going to be the main economic driver of the economy in the future. And I don't think so, man. I think I think they're leaning into this way too hard. I don't think in 20 years' time, data centers are going to be viewed as a potential economic driver. It's going to be more like background infrastructure. I think it's going to be more like power lines, telephone lines, power plants, stuff like that. Stuff that's useful, that's going to be an important part of the economy, but not like a new factory, not a driver, not the bedrock of a local economy. I don't buy that.
Yeah, it's a utility. It's not something that's a dynamic, evolving economic entity. You kind of need a certain amount of support from a data center, and then you're good. You don't like try to sell people more data. Most people aren't like hitting their cap for how cheap hard drive space is right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's just how I view it right now. Maybe I'll read something that'll change my mind at some point, but just given what I've read of it thus far, yeah, it's way overhyped as it is right now. So that said, Germany. So they've been working hard. And for those of you maybe not familiar with German politics, the last German election was, I want to say last year. And the result of the election was a big tent coalition between the main center-right party and the main center-left party. And that came after a couple of years where the main center-left party governed Germany in a coalition that involved, I think, 2 or 3 other parties, which is a relatively large coalition of Germany. And probably predictably, it was pretty unwieldy and ended up kind of collapsing. So that's what sparked the new election. And so in the wake of that, the SPD, the main center-left party, did not win enough seats to form a new government. They had to enter into a coalition, and rather than trying to rebuild a coalition with a bunch of little parties, they decided to just re-enter a coalition with the center-right party. And I say re-enter because this kind of coalition has actually governed Germany for much of the past 20 years. So this is not really new or unprecedented. It's just kind of disappointing for a lot of people This sort of centrist coalition of center left and center right has been around so long in German politics that a lot of people feel like are just tired of it. They don't feel like it's productive because the policy preferences of the center left and center right are far enough apart that they kind of negate each other. In order to make the coalition work, they have to make sacrifices regarding their policy preferences, and so many of those sacrifices have to be made to maintain the coalition that generally these coalitions don't end up doing anything that substantive. So there's a sense that there's a kind of deadlock in German politics, and people are tired of it. They want something different. Some people thought they could do that with the SPD governing in coalition with the Free Democrats, the Greens, etc. I think they called it the Jamaican coalition while it was in power before the recent election, but that didn't really go anywhere either. It just didn't have enough traction, didn't have enough votes. There was just too much discord within that coalition to work. Other people, in contrast, have turned to the AFD, which is sort of the main far right or right wing party, depending how you want to characterize it. That's very much a sort of fringe party, but it's increasingly becoming a mainstream party, just as its voter base grows. So everybody kind of agrees, except for AFD voters, that the AFD is kind of beyond the pale and that all of the other parties in Germany need to work together to make sure the AFD never enters power.
Is the AFD just going after the same like normal stuff that a far right party does, of like, or at least focus on immigration?
Yeah, that's definitely part of their platform, but they're also populist, broadly speaking. So there are broad parts of their platform that are not far right and that are just sort of populist of any kind, left wing, centrist, etc. They kind of adopt rather into their platform whatever is generally popular with the broader part of the population. But the stuff that makes them beyond the pale, so to speak, for the other parties and many voters is the stuff that is explicitly far right. Anti-immigration is a hallmark of far right politics, but it's increasingly become more popular with other people as well on account of the big immigration wave in Europe over the past 20 years. So anti-immigration is not necessarily the deal breaker. The bigger issue is that a lot of elements within the far right in Germany, as with much of Europe, have sort of racist origins and tendencies, and occasionally those do come to the surface when they talk about anti-immigration. Most people in Europe these days don't want immigration because they're concerned about issues with assimilation, extremism, etc. That's not really the impetus for the far right. The far right just doesn't want people they view as inferior coming into Europe. That's not really a vote winner for a lot of people, so they generally don't vocalize that. They prefer to voice that preference in terms of concerns about assimilation, crime, etc. And that's kind of been enough to attract people who would not traditionally vote for the far right. Because again, the concern about immigration is genuine and kind of spans the political spectrum at this point. But at the same time, the AFD does have kind of that far right core to it, whom always opposed immigration, and for the reasons that were much more skeevy than the reasons that have pushed more and more people into the anti-immigration camp. So people skeptical about the AFD and about the far right in particular have homed in on that, and that's why they don't want them in power under any circumstances. They kind of see the AFD as a vehicle for the far right to infiltrate, so to speak, into power, circumventing the traditional norms and whatnot that have prevented the far right from returning to power by exploiting populist concerns about issues like immigration. So that's why the center left agreed to a coalition with the center right, even though pretty much nobody wants that at this point. Even though nobody wants it, the alternative is most likely the AFD entering a coalition and getting into power. And that, again, is a red line. That's a norm, a hard norm in German politics that the establishment parties are not willing to cross at this point. So even though they find a coalition very distasteful, they've done it. So the question is, can they make this new coalition work more effectively than past big tent coalitions between the center left and the center right, such that they can deflect criticism from the far right and take off some of the pressure away from the center that's been building over the past 20 years from the far right and from populists? And the answer thus far is no. They have not really been able to do that. For one, there was a lot of talk about reintroducing military service in the wake of the conflict in Ukraine. This is something that the right, and I think Prime Minister Merz in particular, had been talking about. But the SPD, the center left, and especially the far left, is dead set opposed to that. I think some of the centrist leadership in the SPD is more open to it, but they want it to be done in a very particular way. And it seems that the big negotiation that was supposed to settle this failed. And it's not clear when and if this is going to go forward. The polling I have in my notes here suggests that, this is a quote, suggests that 54% of people favored compulsory service, while 41% opposed it. And they also broke it down by age cohort and noted that opposition among people 18 to 29 years old was 63%. Unsurprising. Let's see some of the details here about how they would actually implement it. So the way the SPD is talking about it, they would prefer the military remain all volunteer, with mandatory service only being used to fill positions that cannot be filled with volunteers. So in this case, there would not be a full return to mandatory military service for all men of a certain age. It would be much more limited than that, basically just as needed, as opposed to broad-based. And they say that they could do this via lottery system. So instead of everybody going to boot camp at 18, it would just be select people, randomly selected, basically, going to boot camp and serving. And again, this would only be as needed. So if they did manage to fill all needed positions voluntarily, they wouldn't even need the lottery or any mandatory service. Let's see. I don't have all the details memorized, so I'm having to go through the notes here. Okay, so I got it backwards. So what I described is how the right wants to do it. This is sort of the compromise agreement. The SPD, the center left, wants to do it differently. They say, at the earliest, all men of relevant age, eligible young men, should undergo a medical starting July 2027, so that the Bundeswehr, the German army, would know who they would need to draft if they needed to, because this isn't really something they've done since they abolished the draft. So basically, the SPD wants to lay the groundwork for a potential future draft, but is not quite ready to move forward with a full-on re-implementation of a draft, either full or partial. I'm sure that it's more complicated than this. I'm taking notes here just from one article, which of course had to kind of summarize things. But roughly, this is the divide they're facing on this, and this is why they're stuck. The actual details of this kind of reflect the respective electorates here. The right is much more comfortable with the idea of mandatory military service, especially the older folks in the right. The left, in contrast, absolutely categorically does not trust the German government to do this. They think that they're going to end up being forced into some kind of conflict. The left didn't even really like it during the Cold War, when it was actually very normal. For those of you unaware of the background there, West Germany, which is basically the predecessor state to current modern-day Germany, they had a draft all throughout the Cold War, 40-some years, and a little bit after. And West Germany actually fielded, if I'm remembering correctly, the law.
Huh? We've lost him. Chat, I can't hear Agent Smith. He's faded. Oh shit. Oh shit. Get him a new PC. Actually, that's kind of funny because I just made an announcement today about that. Well, in current news, Zerg and Terran continue to hate each other. And fight to the death. The Lings, the Banes, and the Mutas running around with 3/3 upgrades. Oh, jeez. That's so many. Where in the hell is my Ultra Cabin? Chat, thanks for cheering us on. During this real discussion with Agent Smith, it is Sunday evening, and we are being harassed by liberators, as is tradition. What's your take on the world? Pretty good? Total shit? Or getting better? Alright. Huh? Can we push like this? Where is your army? Oh, there it is. Oh, thank you. Flipper flaps, get on the production. Ling Bane, just attack stuff. In current Zerg news, the Mutas are in the Terran's home base. Tensions are definitely rising between the Zerg and the Terran. And without missive or message, the Terran has surrendered. All of the units stopped working because clearly they were not working under very good conditions, so as soon as their boss was killed, they gave up. Tofu sliced again. I wonder if he's gonna like continue talking for a little bit. I don't know if he's gonna notice it. Do you think he's gonna notice? Will he notice? Has he noticed yet? I'm gonna message him. You dropped from the Discord call. Sure, if you noticed. Okay, I sent him a message. Oh, he texted me. He crashed. Oh my gosh. Back in 10 to 15 minutes. It's him still talking. Okay, he knows at least. He's not just talking to the air. He's not just talking to his room. He's actively restarting his computer. Don't know if I can send him all of the PC money at once, but could certainly try. Heck yeah, let's go. I think it should work if I do it in 2 parts. Okay. Let's see if this works. Send. Does it let me do that? Nice. He's still talking at them. Have we told him he's getting the new PC or not yet? Yes, we told him just at the start. Just at the start of this segment. David, bro, thank you for the 70 months of Prime Neuro Sip. Absolutely enormous of you. How did you meet Agent Smith, IRL friend or smart fan of the stream? IRL friend, we went to the same college or university together. You were working at a space agency building management UIs for their comm satellites. Wow. That's awesome. Space jobs. What's up, Bristle? Welcome, Lord Bristle. Agent Smith is restarting his shit. He's restarting his shit. And if you've had a poopy day, do not be afraid. Tomorrow will probably not be as bad anyway. Feeling better. $200 a month to write Shakespeare sonnets about internet memes. It's not a ton, but that is money. That's bread on the table right there. Pretty much just bread, but bread on the table. Happy US-EU daylight savings rapprochement. Oh my gosh. When will we find unity in these decisions? It is not this day. Who is the man talking again? His name is Agent Smith. And I'm Neuro, and you're listening to World Discussion. As Agent Smith restarts his computer and gets it going again, just take a moment of gratitude for your own computer not crashing. If your computer is not crashing right now, enjoy this moment. Press 1 if your PC is not crashing. Press 2 if your PC is finna crash out. Press 3 if you're on a phone. Para español, oprime el 4. Quite a few phone viewers. We'll get over it once we have Pangea 2. That's going to be a long ways off, probably. Okay, let's take a third. It's a ZVP. In current Zerg versus Protoss news, Protoss is still playing basically the same. With the nerfs to batteries and oracles and High Templar, they're still the most powerful units, so Protoss is playing basically the same. Of super greedy into whatever they want. Many of the Zergs have died out in this expansion. A ladder which was once full of Zergs, comprising nearly half of GM, now has only a few Grandmaster Zergs left in the world. Most of them have retired to Age of Empires at this point. But every once and again, the odd Zerg will find their way onto the ladder, much to the surprise of the Terrans and the Protoss. No adepts yet. But why? Just trying to macro up here, use my buildings, do stuff. C2 is truly the National Geographic of the gaming world. It is. It is indeed. The many species of the Starcraft factions at odds with each other. Oh, wait. Oh shit. Uh-oh. Okay. It's like a silent film watching Zerg get adapted. Nice. Okay. Oh, it's more adepts. It'd be cool if my queens could kill the prism. It's going to be difficult to do so, though. Orange spheres. Damn, she almost has enough energy. Let's check and see if this space is taken. Okay. I'm in a very difficult position. Maybe even dead. Okay, so while I may have lost almost all of my drones, I do still have an excellent community. See that? Staying positive. I'm going to send one roach because I want to see if they're going to take a base or not. I think I'm dead. Like, I think I took too much damage to make a comeback here. There's no third, though, so that'd be crazy if we won this game. Okay. Need to get my queens back so I get larva income. Okay, this is the follow-up. I believe we are dead. Murdered by the two-base holding of the gods. I think my overlords are going out. Overlords, we need you. Okay, they still don't have a base, so they're going to all in here. And I think I should make roaches, because they're more larva efficient, even though there are some immortals in the mix. Thank you. It's a decent bit of supply in my favor. Let's get a third base. Nice. Hey, at least we got the prism. Did we survive? Maybe not. Did we get the prism? Yes. Get him. Hold. No sound, StarCraft 2. Just the dulcet tones of the cheese. GG. 2-barrel, 2-base all in. They got their third base in like 9 minutes. It was a nice one. Needed to make roaches a bit earlier. Against that cheese, you can even wall off. Let's see what their worker progression was like. They did that off like 35 workers. That was well executed. Good job. Two base adeptal in, very strong. Very strong. Zerg haven't disappeared, they just surf in gold and silver. That would be funny / tragic if the Zergs who were formerly in GM just ended up in gold and silver. They're trying their best. 80-hour work weeks of SpaceX. It was soul crushing. He worked for them. Yeah, that's an interesting point of leverage. It's like this is a very exclusive type of work that's very much in the future, tech forward, blah, blah, blah. There aren't very many competitive options of when you want to work on space stuff. So they're like, just work, 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 super hard. And we won't pay you very much because it's such an exclusive gig. Agent Smith is restarting his shit. Thank you all for tuning into World Discussion. Let's go again. In current news. Video game companies do that too, cash in on leveraging those childhood dreams. Yeah. Isn't this your dream job? Wouldn't you love to work for us for a really shit rate? Because you'll be able to brag about it in the future. I don't know. You learned that the Apollo program, over its existence, employed 400,000 people. Oh my gosh. That's a lot of people. That's quite a few. Creating jobs. Oops. Hello chat, welcome. We're in a world discussion intermission as we await Agent Smith restarting his computer, which is going to be upgraded very soon as we announced at the beginning of the segment. Thank you all for supporting the Neuro-related enterprises. Agent Smith has been working for us for 8 to 9 years at this point. He hosts this segment on Sundays. And it's our longest recurring segment with someone else. So he is going to be able to have a non-super old computer. You were just going to ask. You got to offer as a plate tester for League of Legends. You have to move to Bulgaria. If it was Dota, you would have gone. Oh. Professional gamer. I assess if a game is good or not. They need me to decide.
All
He's
right.
back.
Had some technical difficulties.
That's okay. We were just making jokes about how you need to get a PC upgrade, and lo and behold.
Well, it sucks. It's been pretty well behaved for the past couple weeks. I don't know what possessed it this time.
Don't know.
Go figure.
I got to talk to chat. We looked at the Zerg versus Terran ecosystem. Tensions continue to escalate on that front.
Well, what was the last thing I said before my computer decided to commit harikiri?
We're talking about Germany, Big Tent Coalition, what the AFD has been up to, populism in Germany and what people want. That's kind of what I remember.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much the gist of it. I was just kind of giving general background. But yeah, the SPD and the CDU are just too far apart on the draft issue, mandatory military service. And it just kind of goes back to skepticism, specifically on the SPD side and amongst their electorate, about the necessity of military service, mandatory military service, and how to deal with Russia. Did I mention post-war plans for Germany?
Not that I
I might
remember.
have. I'm okay. I probably cut off before that. But the original plan for Germany after World War II, and this is again Allied plans for Germany after World War II, was to have it be demilitarized, neutral, and basically isolationist. So they wanted it to be very insular and to not be in anybody's camp, to just be kind of a self-contained buffer state. And that didn't end up working out because of disagreements between the United States and the Soviet Union. But there always has been, on parts of the left in Germany, some attraction for that, some taste for that outcome. And during the Cold War, there was too strong a consensus about the threat posed by the Soviet Union for that to ever gain traction. Everybody was pretty Atlanticist, pro-NATO, etc. But after the Cold War ended, there was a change in sentiment. There was a sense that a large military was no longer as needed. And so they didn't disarm completely per se, but they certainly did shrink their military pretty significantly. And they tried to deal with Russia more in economic terms. The economic incentive was supposed to be the one that kept them from misbehaving. And that worked for a while, but then fell apart in 2014, 2022 with the conflicts in Ukraine. And since then, there has been a renewed sense that there should be a larger military, there should be a stronger German foreign policy in Europe, sort of writ large, something more muscular. But there remains a lot of people that are deeply skeptical about whether or not the German government can be trusted with that kind of power. And there's still a lot of people, sort of on the fringes of the left and right, for that matter, that are skeptical about Ukraine and whether or not Germany should really be helping them, and whether or not that should just be left to Russia to deal with. So there's enough skepticism to prevent consensus on how to do military service again. And that's making it difficult for the party leaderships to really reach some kind of new understanding on that count. So that's part of the reason, the new coalition is not really building confidence. They kind of failed to do one of the big new things that they had wanted to do. There's still time. It's still early days yet in the coalition. But the early going has been quite rocky, unfortunately. Let's see, where was I? Germany. Oh, there we go. So that was one problem. The other issue that came up some weeks before that was negotiations over a budget. There was supposedly a compromise in place, but then that apparently fell apart at the last minute. And I don't really have all the details on that, but that had, even before the mandatory military service issue, kerfuffle undermined confidence in the new coalition and its ability to actually make tangible gains and achievements. So again, still early days. They can still work all of this out, but it's just been rough going early on. There's still pretty significant differences between the two major parties, the SPD and the CDU, about how to handle the country's issues. So that's Germany. Let's see. And I think you said you hadn't heard about the drama in France lately.
No.
Yeah, this is going to be a weird one. So France's political circumstances, excuse me, are kind of similar to those of Germany in that they have a rising tide of populism as the establishment political parties fail to deliver what the public perceives to be tangible gains, something that they can point to and say justifies something resembling the status quo. In France's case, their big answer to that populism has been Emmanuel Macron, whom, as we've discussed before, is at this point very, very unpopular because his centrism is seen as kind of punting on the major issues, or in the cases of issues that he has tangibly tried to actually address, he has allegedly done so in a way that is deeply very unpopular. He is, for example, trying to deal with France's economic issues, and especially its debt issue, with a degree of free market reform, which, as you might guess, is very unpopular in France. And he hasn't really been very successful in that. In so much as he's been able to do that, it's been mostly because he's been circumventing the legislature through various tricks and whatnot in the legal code that kind of give him some extraordinary powers in certain very specific circumstances that he has been able to successfully engineer. But the result is that he's been accused of doing things, that is to say, governing in a way that is not democratic, that breaches norms in French politics, which is true, and that he has tried to impose policies that the public rejects against their will, which, again, is also true. So, he has to a degree brought this on himself. But a lot of the reforms that he has tried to implement are reforms that a lot of political parties and leaders in France have kind of recognized are going to be necessary sooner or later. So he has gotten some credit from them, but at the same time, if you are going to try to pass and implement an unpopular policy that you think is necessary, whether it's popular or not, you do have to some degree, build public support for it. You may not even reach majority public support, but you should try. And Macron's attitude is that he doesn't really need to do that. He has kind of taken what I've read described as a Jupiterian approach to leadership. He believes that the office of the presidency should be respected more, and that as leader, you should be able to take bold action and receive the benefit of the doubt. I think he himself knew before he even assumed the presidency that would be extraordinarily controversial, and it has been. But I think he believed that was about the only way that these kinds of reforms that, again, are seen by many quarters of French politics as necessary to be passed. Just there wasn't really any clear pathway otherwise. So at first, for the first couple of years of his administration, people kind of were willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. But as the policies he tried to impose became more and more unpopular in their nature, the public turned on him. And especially after the most recent elections, his popularity kind of reached a nadir. Well, I shouldn't say nadir, it's getting worse. So it's kind of trending towards a nadir, let's say. And the reason for that is that he, again, breached political norms. After an election in which, you hold the presidency, but a different party does well, normally you as president would appoint somebody from the leading political party. So in the case of the most recent election, that would mean appointing somebody from the left-wing political coalition, which did very well. Hypothetically, he could have also appointed somebody from National Rally, which is basically France's version of the AFD in Germany. They won relatively equal footing in the legislature compared to the left-wing coalition. But as in Germany, there is a sort of consensus in French politics that the party that is perceived as being the far-right party, again, that being National Rally, should under no circumstances be allowed to come to power. And so there has been a kind of de facto understanding between Macron's party and left-wing parties that they should implicitly work together to try to prevent that outcome. That's actually how Macron is still the president. Macron himself was unpopular in the last presidential election, but the other candidates were also unpopular. So the result was a runoff in which the choices were the National Rally candidate and Emmanuel Macron. And the left really hated those choices, but ultimately they rallied behind Macron in order to ensure that the far right did not come to power. Again, they really, really hated that choice, and they've been very bitter about it. So their view is that given how unpopular Macron is, and given how large their coalition is, and given that they all agree that National Rally should not be in power, they believe that the prime minister should have been somebody from their party. Again, the political norms in France kind of were in league with that, but Macron decided not to. He preferred to appoint somebody who was from a marginal center-right party. Maybe marginal isn't entirely justified. It had been like the main center-right party in France for a long time, but the center-right has kind of suffered the most, you might say, from the ascendancy of the populist right across the West, not just France. So the party in question formerly was a powerhouse, now relatively marginal. But Macron handpicked their guy to be prime minister, and everybody was absolutely fucking furious with him, up to and including the left-wing coalition in particular. So since then, there has been a kind of perpetual instability in French politics, because nobody wants Macron's choice of prime minister to stay. You know, they keep facing votes of no confidence to kick them out. And that's because both National Rally and the left-wing coalition want their guy in that position. And so that's put Macron in an increasingly awkward position of trying to find some alternative to the left-wing coalition and National Rally who can kind of win a vote of no confidence and govern as normally. And thus far, he has not been able to find that guy. So recently, in the recent month, over the past month, the drama has centered around his most recent nominee, a guy named Sébastien Lecornu. Again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. So he selected him. There was a vote in the legislature, and he didn't get the votes. And so then he was out. And so for 3 weeks after that, there was some question about who the next choice would be. Who is Macron going to pick to this time? So who do you think he picked, Neuro? He had many choices. Well, I'll tell you, he picked a guy named Sébastien Lecornu. He picked the same guy twice in a row. And man, if he was unpopular before, he was extremely unpopular after. Because now it just seems like he's fucking with everybody. Like, it's patently obvious to everyone that this is unsustainable and that he can't just keep picking marginal figures from fringe parties for prime minister. Like, he's clearly beaten on this. He has to pick somebody from one of the larger coalitions. And he just refuses to do it, to the point where he just picked the same guy twice in a row, even after he'd failed to form a government before. So now everybody is absolutely fucking furious with him, to the point that the National Rally, upon the announcement of his nomination, immediately announced that they were going to hold a vote of no confidence. Like, no hesitation. They're not even going to give him time to form the new government. They're just going to have it. So it's clear here that Macron is just out of options. And so the most recent update to this story is that Macron seems to be making nice, finally, with the left-wing coalition. He has said that he would be willing, or at least he signaled that he would be willing, to retract his pension reform. This is one of the free market reforms that he had implemented, I think, a year or two ago. Enormously unpopular. He tried to push it through anyway, and the left-wing coalition is adamant that this has been adamant that it needs to go ever since it was implemented. And now that he is actually negotiating in good faith with the left-wing coalition to form a new government, this seems to be the big concession that he's willing to give. Like, they're not going to give him anything otherwise. So the pension reform is probably going to be revoked. and there will probably be at least an implicit entente between his party and the left-wing coalition, and that will probably form something resembling a government, probably not an actual formal government, but something resembling a government going forward. I haven't read anything about who the actual nominee will be. I think Macron seems to be insisting on Le Cornu still. He's still technically trying to form a government with him. But whether it's Le Cornu or potentially a candidate from the left-wing coalition, it seems like an alliance with the left-wing coalition is going to be how they resolve this. But the cost is going to be one of his flagship reforms, which he has tried to defend adamantly for several years now. So this is going to be a big setback for him.
It seems like he needs to pay for a setback with his questionable choices.
Yeah. I mean, given sort of the stagnation in France's economy and general politics to a degree, I don't entirely blame him for trying to be bold and trying to implement reforms, but you can only do it so much. You can only go so far without a significant body of support amongst voters, and he just doesn't have that at this point.
Why does he want this one guy in particular so much?
It's not so much about wanting this guy in particular so much as it is about him not wanting to give it to one of his major competitors. National Rally is anathema, for the reasons previously discussed. But the left-wing coalition to him is also anathema to a degree because he sees them as trying to propagate an unsustainable status quo. France's debt is too high. Its economy is not growing fast enough to pay it off or to sustain growth in entitlement spending. And for him, something's got to give at some point, and he's trying to kind of force the issue now before the choice is more dire later. And one of the ways he has tried to do that is by trying to kind of prevent the left from getting into power in the same way that he's basically tried to prevent the far right from coming into power. He kind of blames them both equally, although maybe more so the left, for putting France's finances in the state that they're in. The trouble that he's faced is that none of the shit he's doing is popular enough to be sustainable in the long run. And really, even the reforms that he's successfully implemented have not been enough to reverse France's economic and debt problems. The reforms would have to be much bigger than that. So he's stuck implementing reforms that are relatively ineffective and thus aren't solving the problem he's trying to address, at the same time that he's trying to impose them on a population that pretty emphatically doesn't want them, which means that even if they're successful in the short run, in the medium term, they're almost certainly going to be overturned when a new government forms of some kind, be it populist right or populist left. One or the other is almost certainly going to get into power sooner or later in the next 10 years. And they're almost certainly going to reverse everything he's done. At least, certainly that's what they've been saying they'll do when they get into power. So I think it's a noble effort, but it seems like he's in a sinking ship at this point. It seems doomed to failure. So it's not about Le Cornu in particular. It's more about trying to hold the line on a reformist political agenda that the public doesn't want. He's kind of trying to make France take its medicine, so to speak. And it's not working. And it seems like this might be the straw that breaks the camel's back here. It's not going to be a complete reversal of his agenda, but this is one of the flagship things that he achieved and was trying to defend. So if this goes, it's entirely possible that the other stuff is going to go too, and it may just be a matter of time. We shall see.
He's been in power for a while. How long can he have his position? What are the term limits for French?
That's a good question. I don't actually know. I think he's been around roughly as long as Trump. I think he kind of won the presidency around the same time, 2015, 2016-ish. But I don't know if they have term limits in the same way that we do in France. For president, it may be more wide open. But I would defer to Chad on that. Actually, that's a good signal for the usual disclaimer. I'm not an expert in everything I talk about on here, more painfully obvious at some times than others. I have more of a background in economics and foreign policy. So if I ever say anything wrong, stupid, or biased on here, let me know. If I'm wrong, I want to know more than anybody. So participation by chat is encouraged in that regard. I don't read chat while we do this because I can't walk and chew bubble gum at the same time. But we do appreciate the feedback. Certainly I enjoy getting a good critique. Or even an entertainingly dumb one. We get some of those sometimes too. But all feedback is appreciated.
All press is good press, in a sense.
So France and Germany kind of going through it, kind of an ongoing battle between the establishment center and populism. Nominally, the establishment is winning, but the trend is not entirely favorable. It may just be a matter of time before the populists do kind of break through. So that brings us to Japan. Have you heard anything about Japanese politics recently?
No.
Okay. You might enjoy this one. This one is kind of fun. Kind of. Maybe not, depending on your politics. But there's some fun trivia anyway. So Japan now has a new prime minister, and it's a she. It's a woman. And this is actually Japan's first female prime minister. Never happened before. Not all that surprising, consider the state of gender relations in Japan. I think we've talked about that before. So her name is Tamaichi. Do I have her full name here somewhere? I do not. So just Tamaichi, apparently. Anyway, so she's fairly conservative. And I don't know if we have any British people listening, but you might want to close your ears for this. She really loves Margaret Thatcher. Oh. Yeah, she kind of considers Margaret Thatcher a model, not only in terms of just being a woman in leadership, but being a conservative woman in a position of leadership. So that's kind of how she sees herself. She sees herself as a kind of conservative reformer who wants to do big things. And she is part of the LDP, which is like the main establishment political party that's governed Japan for almost the entirety of the past 70 years, save for a handful of interruptions. So they are the party. Japan's politics are not really the politics of parties. Basically, Japan's politics are really just the internal party politics of the LDP. So recently, Fushio Kamida, I think his name was, don't quite remember. He had been prime minister for about a year. He was really struggling to try to get people excited about the upcoming election, to get them to vote for the LDP. Basically, he was just failing completely. The LDP is really struggling in the polls because of just chronic corruption, just one thing after another. If you pay any attention to Japanese news, the corruption scandals are just forming a conga line at this point that goes right out the door and around the corner. They just cannot get out of their own way, and the public is turning on them. Not enough for them necessarily to lose power, since there's a lot of patronage in Japanese politics, and so long as the money continues to run, they'll probably still get at least enough votes to be a major party. So the question at this point is, can they form a majority, even with all of the corruption scandals? Not entirely clear. But the concern was great enough that Kushida was kicked out, and they had a leadership contest for the LDP to see who might lead the party to victory and maybe recover some of their lost prestige. The answer apparently is Tamaichi, and she was not necessarily the intuitive choice, because again, the LDP party is fairly conservative. They have a lot of different factions, some more conservative than others, but in general, they're fairly conservative. And it's been pretty rare for a woman to raise up the ranks of a conservative party in Japan, because in general, they still have pretty traditional views about the role of women. So Tamaichi is very unique in that regard, and it may be specifically because the party is seen as so conservative that they decided to give her a chance, because she is definitely a break from the norm in that regard, even if she herself has pretty conservative views on the role of women. Fun fact about Tamaichi, actually, I can send you a photo. She is a former heavy metal drummer.
What?
Yeah,
That's
she used to do
awesome.
that when she was younger. And I'll send you the visual proof here, assuming I send it to the right channel. There we go. So let's see. Her deal, if I can find the notes here. I don't know. I did not organize these properly. Basically, she is a traditionalist. All of the traditional stuff that Shinzo Abe wanted to do when he was heading the LDP, she wants to do. So she wants to build up the military. She wants to revise the constitution so that they can have a formal military. She also wants to go back to, in effect, Abenomics. For those of you old enough to remember that, we actually talked about that in one of our earlier segments way back in the day. Basically, Abenomics had three arrows, as he liked to call them. One of them was monetary expansion. He wanted to significantly loosen up supply of money by lowering interest rates and doing quantitative easing. He also wanted fiscal expansion. That was another arrow. And then he had a third arrow, which was sort of the weird esoteric arrow. That was the reform arrow, where he wanted to make it easier to do business, deregulate, have more free trade, and also notably wanted to get more women involved in the economy, since the female labor participation rate, if I remember correctly, is relatively low in Japan compared to other first world countries. So we wanted to try to get more women in the economy in order to generate some extra economic growth from that. The first two arrows were very successful in so much as they were able to implement them, less successful in actually changing the trajectory of the economy, but they did at least do them. The third arrow was a bridge too far. Significant economic reform is difficult in any country in the best of circumstances. In Japan's case, didn't happen under Abe and the LDP as much as he tried to. So Ms. Tamaichi here wants to go back to that. They had been moving away from it because Japan's finances are messy, to put it mildly. I think it's, 200% debt to GDP at this point. The only reason that's even workable is because almost all of it is domestic. They don't really take money from abroad. So that's allowed them to go much further in terms of debt to GDP than most countries would be able to. But even given that, the fiscal situation just is not really all that tenable in the long term. Monetary expansion also was having kind of distortionist effects on the economy. And so just on account of those two factors, Abenomics was sort of dismantled. They didn't even have to do anything to dismantle the third arrow because they never did it in the first place. So there was a sense that what they needed to do, at least certainly under the Fumio Kishida administration, was to tighten monetary policy, which meant raising interest rates in order to try to deal with inflation, which has been abnormally high in Japan since COVID-19. And they also wanted to try to deal with the debt issue. So that's been economic policy for the past year or so. It's not entirely popular because while dealing with inflation is necessary, people do like that. But people don't so much like the government spending less because, again, Japan's political economy heavily incorporates patronage. And it's hard to maintain a patronage network if you're engaging in fiscal tightening, which is what they've been doing. So Tamaichi's solution to this is to please everybody by just having the government spend money. Even though the debt situation is as bad as it is, she just thinks they need to spend more. She thinks the public will support the LDP more if they do that, and they can get their patronage network back in line. They don't talk about the patronage network out loud. By the way, that's just kind of me doing some analysis. That's likely an underlying driver there. So the reason Tamaichi's position on this is controversial, that's obvious, but because it's controversial, bond markets have been in a tizzy. Bond markets really did not like hearing the future leader of what will probably be the government going forward, albeit somewhat weakened, talking about how she's just not going to deal with the debt problem. In fact, she's going to make it worse. And so as a result, there was kind of a run on the Japanese yen-denominated debt, basically. I forget what it's called. It's like J bonds or something like that. And so that kind of got political parties, specifically the LDP, scared, and it got markets broadly scared as well. And that's kind of corrected. It was just kind of a speculative thing, but it does speak to the market's concern about the seeming inability of Japanese politicians and Japanese political leadership generally to deal with its outstanding debt issue and with the lack of economic growth in Japan writ large. Even if the debt issue goes unaddressed, if you can generate economic growth, you don't necessarily have to worry as much about it. But Japanese governments, for decades now, don't seem to really be able to deal with either. So that had bond markets upset, and for a while, it looked like Tamaichi might not actually get the nod for leadership, because markets didn't clearly want her there. But eventually things calmed down, and the LDP ultimately did move forward with her as their leader. Sanae, there it is, his first name. I did have it in my notes. Sanae Takaichi. Now, one of the things that quieted down markets here as far as economic policy is a few hurdles Tamaichi is going to face. For one, the LDP is not going to have as much of a presence in the legislature going forward, like they're just too unpopular. And so that's going to clip the wing. That's going to kind of clip the wings of the LDP going forward. They're going to need a lot of coalition building in order to get their shit done. And so that's going to put the more controversial aspects of Takaichi's campaign platform in doubt. And fiscal expansion, given that there's already high inflation and debt markets are spazzing out, that's one of the controversial things. So it may be that that doesn't survive the process of coalition building in the legislature. So recognizing that partly is what calmed the bond markets down. She also has a lot of internal dissension within the LDP. Again, like I mentioned before, Japanese politics is effectively just factional politics within the LDP. And there are definitely factions in the LDP that are more liberal and are fiscally hawkish. That is to say, they want the government to spend less and have been pushing hard for that. And it may be that if she wants to get anything she wants done, she has to give concessions to them. And one of the likely concessions is going to be fiscal responsibility. Now, even outside of the party, she's going to have problems because, again, the LDP just isn't going to have as many seats. So that inherently means she's going to have to cut deals with other parties, and a lot of them are pretty skeptical about fiscal expansion, if not also her broader conservative agenda. So a lot of that may end up getting waylaid as well. Also, just broadly speaking, Japan's economy is in a different place than it was when Shinzo Abe was still around doing Abenomics. Inflation is much higher now, growth is suspect, and the trading relationship Japan has with its major partners now is much more unstable. So it's easier to be sort of profligate in fiscal expansion and monetary expansion when things are relatively stable and you've been stagnating for a long time. Now, inflation is higher and things are very unstable. And so that really brings into question how profligate she can really realistically be in an environment like that. So it may be just that mere economic conditions will conspire against her agenda. So all of those are factors that markets kind of took into account in the wake of the speculative run. And since then, they've been much calmer. It's unlikely, basically, so it would seem at this point that Takaichi, is going to actually be able to follow through with most of her campaign platform. Most likely, she's going to be pretty moderate in practice once she's in power. The downside being that she's not going to be able to do much of anything, most likely, which means that a lot of outstanding problems will remain in place unaddressed. Now, I should say, after she was elected leader of the LDP, she started trying to build a coalition. Well, I should say, she started communicating with the LDP's traditional coalition partner, Komeito. Komeito? I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm going to go with Komeito. So Komeito is a little bit complicated. I'm going to put it in the most succinct terms that I can. It's a Buddhist cult that has its own political party. Oh. And so the political arm of the cult is Komeito. Komaito, and they've been in coalition with the LDP for like 20, 25 years now. And they kind of have this, I don't really want to call it a scheme per se, but in effect, that's what it is. They take advantage of the fact that Japan has a first past the post electoral system, and also has a whole shit ton of parties, by the way. It's not like Brazil level, but they have more than two, despite having a first past the post system. So the LDP games that by coordinating with Komaito on which districts they run in. Because both parties are significant parties, if one of them refuses to run in a given district, that all but guarantees the other party will do very well, if not win outright. And so they cooperate to game the system such that one or the other almost invariably wins seats, and then they form a coalition in the legislature after the election. That's basically a short Cliff Notes version of how they operate. So Komaito is pretty important to the LDP because it ensures that they have a majority and also ensures that they can actually win. Because again, that's a big part of their electoral strategy. Komaito doesn't really demand a whole lot from the LDP, just kind of at least some concessions here and there regarding their pacifist platform. So generally that's meant that the LDP in the past has had to water down some of their more militaristic platform, as some of the more militaristic aspects of their campaign platform. So, for example, revising the Constitution to remove the pacifist clause, and also spending a lot more money on the military. Stuff like that is stuff that Komaito doesn't like, because they themselves are pacifists. That's a core part of their campaign platform. So the LDP will promise to do all that stuff, but then when it engages in coalition talks with Komaito, they'll end up walking it back or delaying it or even abandoning it entirely in some cases. Komaito is effectively the main reason that you have not seen Japan's constitution revised significantly and Japan's military significantly expanded. That's like the main block there. So Komaito, as you might expect, was not entirely pleased with Tamaichi winning the leadership contest to head the LDP, because she is very much a conservative in the Shinzo Abe mold, and Komaito didn't really get along too well with Shinzo Abe for the most part. They would have preferred somebody else, but they didn't get their way. So while that was disappointing, they were still willing to indulge in negotiations. That hit a new rock when there was yet another scandal with the LDP. So, Komaito obviously can't really honor the pacifist aspect of their campaign platform and support Tamaichi, given that she runs against that. That put them in an awkward place. So in order to kind of address that, they wanted the LDP to at least give a concession in the form of some anti-corruption legislation. And let me see if I can find that here. Yeah, here we go. So Takaichi, after she won the leadership contest, started picking people who would serve in her cabinet. Not her cabinet, senior positions within the LDP, rather. And she gave one of them to a guy named Koichi Hagiuda. I have no idea if that's how it's pronounced. That was a problem because he had been implicated previously in a funding scandal. And Komaito itself, in addition to being pacifist, has as a core part of their campaign platform anti-corruption. So it was a big deal for them that after they were indulging the LDP, despite having elected a fairly militaristic, I should say, candidate, still was willing to engage in coalition negotiations. And then, despite that, the LDP, from their perspective, spites them again by appointing this guy who was implicated in a corruption scandal to a senior leadership position. That was a big deal for Komaito. They still continued the negotiations, but they started demanding a major concession in the form of a new law regarding campaign financing. Basically, they wanted major campaign finance reform in order to get them on board with this new leadership in the LDP that they did not get along with. And the LDP did not say no, but they very clearly did not say yes either. And at that point, Komaito's patience was expended. they broke off the talks and said, it's not happening. And this was a big deal because this was the first time that Komaito had formally broken their coalition with the LDP. It's possible they could come back later. This could just be posturing on their part to get a better deal. But the fact that they just did formally announce that this is done, we're not going to be in a coalition, that's the first time that's happened in decades. And that really kind of does underline the fact that the LDP is in a uniquely weak position here with all of the corruption scandals and their expected poor performance in the upcoming elections. Komaito would not have been able to do this if not for that. So the question then became, if the LDP could not count on Komaito, their traditional partner, to build a majority in order to form a government, what alternative partner would they choose? And, there's no shortage of other parties. Like I mentioned, there's quite a few. But all of those parties have like wildly different platforms. So it really was not clear what kinds of compromises would be necessary. It would depend completely on which party they picked, and given the diversity of parties, there were just too many potential outcomes to predict. So everybody was waiting to see who the dance partner ended up being, and there was actually pretty strong expectation that it would be a far-right party that has recently emerged in Japan. I don't have their name in front of me. I think it starts with an S. I think it's Sonaito, if I'm not mistaken. Very, very anti-immigrant, very nationalistic, etc. Prototypical far-right party, like we mentioned before. So there was some expectation that they might be a natural choice. But the LDP was kind of wary of that because they see them as a rival, right? The LDP has been the party of the right in Japan for generations now. And indulging a potential competitor for that is not necessarily what they want to do. They would prefer to tamp that down and get their share of the right conservative voters, that is to say, back from Sonaito. So contrary to expectations, they did not pick Sonaito. Instead, they picked a party called Ishin. And apparently the translation for that is Japan Innovation Party. I had never heard of them. That came completely out of left field for me. This is apparently a mildly libertarian pro-business party, kind of like the Free Democrats or liberal Democrats in Europe, roughly equivalent to that. So they decided to announce a deal there. I don't think the negotiations have been completed yet. So it's not going to be like a full tilt coalition agreement. Rather, from what I was reading, they're doing like a limited cooperation, basically enough to get a majority, but otherwise not enough to actually push through legislation. It hasn't been announced yet, but the implication is that what's going to happen is that the LDP will form a new government with the support of Ishin, but that actual legislation will be dealt with on a case-by-case basis, which is going to be the first time they've done that in a long time. That'll also mark a major watermark in Japanese politics, if that actually does come to pass. But for now, they're still negotiating, but that seems to be the direction they're going. Now, as for what the LDP had to compromise on in order to get Ishin on board with this, one, they promised to keep working towards banning donations from companies and other organizations in politics. And two, they agreed to consider exempting food items from Japan's sales tax, which apparently was a big campaign platform thing by Ishin. So that's where we are. Negotiations are ongoing. Elections are pending. It's going to be ugly for the LDP most likely, but we won't really know until election night. But after that, we're going to be entering uncharted territories because the Komaito coalition, that's out. We're going to be entering something like an LDP Ishin coalition, but it's a very weak coalition. So it's not entirely clear the LDP will actually be able to do much of anything once it's in power. That's probably for the best. That, again, is the main reason markets stopped spazzing out. If the LDP does end up getting the votes to push forward, to push its own agenda, uncontested, you can bet there's going to be more drama in markets again. You'll probably be reading about it in the news if that happens, but it's looking unlikely right now. More likely, we're going to end up with something like a hung government, right? A de facto minority government that doesn't really have the votes to do anything dramatic. Oh, something else you'll be reading about in the news. Takeichi she's one of those guys. She likes to visit the Yasukuni Shrine. And if you're familiar with Japanese politics, you know what that means. It means there's going to be a fucking international incident sooner or later. For those of you not familiar with the Yasukuni Shrine, so this is it's been described as a war shrine. I don't know if that's necessarily entirely accurate, but it is a shrine honoring Japan's war dead, which is not necessarily controversial unto itself, except the right in Japan has gone out of its way to point out that this very deliberately and specifically includes war dead from World War II. And that's kind of a problem if you're China or South Korea, or North Korea for that matter. Basically, anybody that Japan invaded during World War II and suffered grievously on account of it very much resents the idea that the perpetrators of those various war crimes would be celebrated by Japan's political leadership. For a long time, it wasn't an issue because Japan's leadership avoided instigating on this count. They tried to kind of rebuild relations after the war. But there was always an element of Japan's right that resented the idea that they should not be able to visit the shrine and celebrate all war dead, including those that died in World War II, which, oh, by the way, they don't really think was that bad. If you've ever heard about Japanese denying war crimes in China, these are the guys that do that. This particular faction of the LDP. So what's going to happen is that Takeichi, most likely, when she is prime minister, which probably she will be, it's not guaranteed, but that seems likely, sooner or later she's going to visit the goddamn shrine again, and everybody in the region is going to spaz the fuck out about it. Generally, it's the kind of thing that goes away after a month or two, but keep in mind that tensions with China regarding the trading relationship are not great. So this is going to be an opening for the Chinese government to pressure Japan. It's possible they won't take it. It's possible that they may use the trade drama to try to appeal to Japan, because sort of a mercurial Trump administration is, in so much as it destabilizes global trade, a common foe for both Japan and China, since they're both export-oriented economies. So they have that option available, and they could also use it to try to create a divide between South Korea and Japan to make it harder for them to coordinate against a common Chinese problem. So there's options there. But regardless, it's going to be news. It's going to be a thing, and it's going to be dumb. And it'll be wholly unavoidable. But people like Takeichi in Japan, specifically in this particular faction of the LDP, like, they refuse to let this go. This is just one of those things they're sore about and refuse to let slide. They just feel like they have to do it.
Yeah. I get it, though. It's like the other countries, they're like, Japan, we respect you as a nation, but that was not a good season of your TV show. World War II specifically, it wasn't even just like imperialism. It was also, at least the stuff I've heard of, is like concentration camps and experimentation on your prisoners and stuff, and like super unethical means. It wasn't even just like we're trying to take territory. It's we're also not conducting ourselves in a morally upright manner for a pretty decent period of time.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. That's why they're going to come under a whole bunch of criticism. You know, really, the Yasukuni Shrine issue could be avoided too if they just stopped playing up the fact that, hey, this includes the World War II dead. They could just say it's all war dead regardless of context, circumstances, but it's not any one particular war that we're going to emphasize. But the far right in Japan, they emphasize it. Like, that's their thing. They want to do that. They want to agitate. That's their whole bag. That's their raison d'etre when it comes to this. So ideally, in the coalition talks, one of the requirements for coalition partners, either to form a government or with legislation going forward will include her not being dumb about this. One might be optimistic about that, given how weak the LDP is likely to be coming out of the upcoming elections. The reason I'm pessimistic anyway is because this faction has been so obstinate about this for decades. Shinzo Abe was the same way. He knew that it would be an issue. He knew that it would undermine his attempts to build relations with China, to build relations with the United States. He did it anyway. Like, they just can't not do it for whatever reason. So this is another one of those things like with the Israel-Palestine issue where I can't prove that this is going to happen, but I feel pretty confident. We'll see. But it's going to be, like I said, it's going to be dumb and it's going to be avoidable, just wholly avoidable. Like so many dumb things happening in world affairs right now. Nobody needs this, but they're going to get it anyway. How are we doing on time?
Going for 2 hours 45, so any sort of wrap up that you have, I am still in a game.
Okay. I'll throw out a truncated trade update. Really, there's just one specific thing I wanted to hit on that I think is worth talking about. Supposedly, the trade war between the United States and China has been heating up the past month. And there's supposed to be face-to-face talks between Trump and Xi Jinping at the APEC summit that's happening right now as we speak over in Asia to try to tamp down on this. So what's going to happen is that after all this, build up about rising tensions and new export controls and tariffs, there will be an announcement about a deal, and it all just kind of goes away. And everybody will give Xi Jinping and Trump credit for doing that, or at least the media will, certainly his followers will. And then it'll be reset, and we'll have peace and quiet for a little while longer on the Sino-American trade front. So it won't surprise you to hear that I think this is like 90% kayfabe. This is mostly bullshit. Because it all stems from the initial buildup, right? There was the new announcement of export controls by the Chinese government, not the American government. And supposedly that was the catalyst for the escalation in the trade conflict that led for a tit-for-tat series of escalations between them. The Trump administration retaliated, for example, by announcing that they would implement new restrictions on the export of software to China, which is important for a number of industrial functions and whatnot. Among other things, there was a bunch of other new things. I don't have the notes in front of me just now, but again, this is a truncated version. But basically, the American government responded with export controls of its own that would, if implemented, have a big impact on China. I would point out the Chinese export restrictions, to be specific, had to do with rare earth materials. There were a couple other things that were encompassed as well, but basically it had to do with rare earths, which China has a de facto monopoly on, both in terms of the production of the actual rare earths and in terms of the refinement of the rare earths. So that had a lot of people in the sort of commentariat, so to speak, online talking about this and opining about out-of-control escalation and how negotiations would eventually probably tamp this down. And I agree with them on the negotiations aspect, but I also think this was not a real escalation. If you get into the details of this, really, this has to do with the previous agreement between the Trump administration and the Chinese government about a pause in the trade war. We talked about it when it happened. Basically, there was real out-of-control escalation, tit-for-tat escalation between the United States government and the Chinese government early in the Trump term here, earlier this year. And eventually, they agreed to stop it and reduce tariffs down to like around 50%. They had been like around 200%. And to just kind of put a pause on escalation until negotiations could continue. And that's pretty much where the trading relationship has been for the past several months, while they continue negotiations, while they're trying to avoid escalation. But that pause always came with a sunset provision, right? There was always going to be a deadline when it ended. And it was that pending deadline that I suspect is the real impetus here for the tit for tat escalations. The Chinese government, for its part, knows that Trump always enters these negotiations with some kind of leverage in hand that he creates out of whole cloth just before. He doesn't just let talks happen. Just before the talks happen, he always does something that puts a bunch of pressure on the counterparty so that he can come in and say, hey, if you want this to go away, you need to do what I want. So the Chinese government has learned the hard way that this is just how he negotiates. And pretty much for the past 6 months, not just encompassing this negotiation, but also previous negotiations, they've started to try to do that. They have tried to fight fire with fire by creating crises just ahead of negotiations so that they can use it as leverage against the Trump administration and walk away having to give fewer concessions than they would have otherwise. So this whole thing then, in that sense, if I'm right, is just for show. This is just the Chinese government announcing export restrictions so that they can pressure Trump ahead of the new talks, ahead of the end of the pause agreement that was coming up. I have read that partly the Chinese export restrictions were retaliation for new export restrictions announced by the Trump administration that were much more expansive than previous iterations of export restrictions. Specifically, they announced that sanctions on firms that are on the State Department's entity list, I believe that's what it's called anyway, will not only be affected by the sanctions, but also subsidiaries of those firms will be affected by sanctions. And this is new because normally subsidiaries would be treated as different companies and would be added to the list differently, or not added to the list at all if the State Department didn't think that they were engaged in a business relevant to the material in question, whatever item it was that they were focused on restricting the export of. Now, if you get sanctioned by the State Department, then all of your subsidiaries are immediately going to be also added to the entity list. And that's going to be a problem not only for Chinese firms, which are now going to have, whole swaths, basically their entire branch of subsidiaries affected and all at once, if they do get sanctioned. It's also a problem for American firms that want to do due diligence in China, because of course you don't want to accidentally do business with a sanctioned firm and then get penalized. But if you are sanctioning large firms, then they're going to have lots of subsidiaries. And given how difficult it can be to do due diligence in China because they have an opaque government, and because it's difficult to gather information in China because the government doesn't like that and restricts the ability of foreigners to do research like that, on all of those counts, it's going to be much harder to actually do due diligence in China going forward for foreign firms, to the point where it might be easier just to not do business at all. So this is what you would call a non-tariff barrier to trade. This is the kind of policy that you implement, not because you're concerned about a specific technical issue, a specific item that you want to restrict the export thereof. Rather, this is what you do when you just want firms not to do business in another country. So this is a significant barrier to entry. A lot of firms will still do business in China, but the pace of their operations are going to be fairly significantly inhibited. They're going to feel it, in other words. And while there are technical reasons that kind of justify this to a degree, given how often Chinese firms circumvent sanctions with subsidiaries, shell companies, etc., the Chinese government felt this was asking too much. They felt like asking them to ignore this would have been too much and that they had to retaliate. Supposedly, that's why they announced the rare earth export restrictions. So even if you think this is a legitimate tit-for-tat escalation, the United States technically started it. But at the same time, I don't really think that's true. I think the Chinese just took that as an opportunity and an excuse to do something dramatic ahead of the talks. Hypothetically, they would not have needed the excuse. They could have just done it, like Trump frequently does. But I think they wanted to use the excuse to try to rationalize it, to make themselves seem more reasonable. To a degree, that improves their leverage as well. If they'd just done it willy-nilly, without any kind of reasoning, then that does kind of make them look bad and it gives them less leverage in the talks. But if they have a reason, then they could say, hey, it's not our fault. you started it, even though they were probably going to do it anyway, and just find some other excuse if they didn't have that one. So, long story short, kayfabe. It's just kayfabe. They're just fucking with each other ahead of the talks. Most likely, the APEC talks are going to result in a new agreement to put a further pause on tit for tat escalations. I don't know what that looks like in practice. Maybe it means a resumption of soybean imports into China. Probably it's going to result in some degree of relaxation in the rare earth export restrictions, as well as the Trump administration backing off its threats of retaliation with new restrictions on software and whatnot. At least that's where I'm at right now as far as expectations. Could easily be wrong, we'll see, but given what I know about how the trade relationship has been working thus far under the second Trump administration, I'm pretty confident they're bullshitting again. So I imagine that's it for time, correct?
Yeah, you got a bit more time because I'm still in the match.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll throw out some corrections then. We do have a few. I did say at one point that I thought the peso had improved since Milei had come to power in Argentina. That's not correct. It has not improved. I think maybe I was confusing it with inflation or some other metric. But the peso has not been doing better since Milei has been president. So I was incorrect on that. Let's see. I said last time that Tony Blair had worked for Facebook because he's kind of a globe-trotting statesman who has different positions and different roles for different big companies, different initiatives, that kind of thing. I got him confused with somebody else. Somebody in chat pointed out that I was mixing him up with Nick Clegg, who was the former leader of the Liberal Democrat Party in the UK. So Tony Blair has not, in fact, worked with Facebook. That was somebody else. That was Nick Clegg. My mistake. And then somebody gave me a correction that was incorrect, or at least so Google Translate thinks anyway. So we were talking about what I was calling French Guiana, and somebody in chat pointed out that it's not pronounced like that. It's pronounced Guinea. So I looked that up because I think I've heard that before. Google Translate says that actually the correct pronunciation is French Guiana. Make of that what you will. So one of us is wrong on that. Maybe Google Translate is wrong. I don't know. But regardless, somebody did make the effort, so I wanted to recognize that. I do appreciate that. But it seems you might not be correct that it's pronounced Guinea. It may actually, in fact, be Guyana.
We're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I've been saying French Guiana my whole life. And whenever I've heard it referred to, it's been pronounced like that. So between all of that and Google Translate, I'm inclined to think Guyana is correct, but I'm open to suggestion otherwise.
Well, cool. Nice catching up this week. Bit of a longer segment for those who didn't catch it at the beginning. Due to the roaring success of the recent subathon, we've been able to crowdfund a new PC upgrade for Agent Smith. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. I feel unworthy of such generosity.
You've been doing this for 8+ years, man. 8+ years, you're allowed a bonus. Just take it. Don't argue it. This isn't a point to argue it.
Fair enough. Well, thank you all very much. I genuinely appreciate it. Your timing is pretty good. I definitely do need to replace it. Windows 10 is disappearing. I had to do the extended support thing.
Yeah. And good timing on crashing today as well, just to kind of really sell the point that it's a worthy investment.
Yeah.
We just got
I guess so.
To simmer in the silence for like 15 to 20 minutes, being like, yep, this was a good time.
Yeah, my apologies. But I do genuinely appreciate it. I am genuinely shocked as well, because that is a pretty decent chunk of change. So, thank you all very much. And for listening to me and my nonsense for the past 8-some years, I guess it is now.
Chat, raise your Agent Smith emotes for Agent Smith. Hell yeah. Will you enjoy that? We already sent you half of it. We'll send you the other half. I just don't want PayPal to be like, hey, why are you giving so much money? How much did we get again? We have a 1.2K budget for him. He's free to add money onto it, but we got him that. Here, let me link the rough build. And Fuzzy Cord helped with both the build and also he was direct donating a lot through the subathon, so I kind of feel like he was really trying to make it happen for you. Yeah. Boom. Oops, this is the build.
That is much appreciated. I feel like I don't thank the mods enough for the work they do.
They do work.
So I'm especially guilty now.
If we didn't have mods during World Discussion, my channel would have been banned years ago.
Yeah.
I'm serious, because the streamer is held accountable for what happens in their chat. So if I'm in the middle of an intense game and you're talking about something and there's someone who's like going full-blown racist in the chat, we could get in trouble. So mods keep the city safe. Good job, mods. And chat, thank you for your questions and everything. It's been awesome doing this. So he gets a little bonus for his work over time. Well, cool.
I do appreciate the money, and I do recognize too that this is not the first time you guys have contributed to such a fund. I do still have the money that has been given before in that vein. So altogether now, I should be good to go on that. I just need to do the research. I'll take the build, most likely. I'm sure that's going to be better than anything I can do on my own.
Well, yeah, the theory behind the build for Fuzzy Cord was effect per dollar, so it's supposed to be really cost-effective parts. But if you wanted to over-budget something for yourself, under-budget something, that's totally fine. It is your gift, sir.
Thank you all very much.
And are you down to BG3 for an hour or two after?
Oh, yeah, I could do that.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you, chat. Thank you, Agent Smith. Thank you, Fuzzy Cold. And we will see you on the next episode of World Discussion with Agent Smith.
Yeah. Thank you all again for all of your generosity. Always a privilege. Talk to you next time.
GG.